受け継がれゆく意志、時代のうねり、人の夢。人々が自由の答えを求める限り、それらは決してとどまることはない。
おい、海賊王！あんたは手に入れたんだろ？あの伝説の大秘宝！
貴様、黙れ！
あの一つなぎの大秘宝！ワンピースをよ
What is the One Piece? Eiichiro Oda's lifelong masterwork, One Piece, is a grand epic that millions and millions of people all across the globe have enjoyed and loved for the past 24 years. It's a tale that has shaped and changed lives, delivered so much joy, connected so many people together, and given birth to a whole new world of endless adventure. And yet, even after all those years, there is one question that every single reader has asked themselves at least once. Just what does One Piece even mean? The start of the series makes it very clear that One Piece is the name of the treasure that the Pirate King, Goldie Roger, left behind on the final island of the Grand Line. It's our main goal, the one thing the main characters chase after for the entire series. The story is called One Piece because it's all about the search for this treasure. In that regard, this series could not have a more fitting name. But can we really say that when we don't even know what it means? 24 years ago, the mangaka king Eiichiro Oda presented the world with one of the biggest puzzles in the history of fiction, the mystery of the One Piece. His words encouraged people all across the world to unravel this mystery, with millions of fans making it to the net to speculate, theorize, and search for an answer to this incredible enigma. Oda has left so many clues, so many little hints, and I believe that he has left enough of them for someone to legitimately discover what the One Piece is. The pieces of the puzzle are all there, but this puzzle is simply too complicated to put together. The clues are so far spread out, so vaguely contextualized, and so dastardly hidden that to actually understand it all and be able to piece this massive puzzle together into one piece would be a Herculean task, to the point that in all of its years of publication, no one has yet managed to find a definitive answer. And because of that, we still cannot grasp why it holds such important narrative relevance and why it would make so much sense as the title of the series. In its 24 years of serialization, much like the 24 years that have passed within the series since Roger was first executed, no one has yet been able to crack this mystery. Sure, maybe someone made some lucky guess or caught on to some thread, that is statistically unavoidable, but to actually understand and prove what the treasure is without a shadow of a doubt, to get what the One Piece is and why it makes so much sense, it would take hundreds or no, even thousands of hours of research, years of studying, rereading and analyzing every little detail in the series, to overlook nothing and to connect every piece together, something that no rational person would ever devote to a fictional story. But I did it. For as silly as it may sound, I've always been drawn to this dream. To be the first man to ever uncover what the One Piece is. To do something that no one has ever achieved before. Not for the wealth, fame, or power, but because it is simply my dream. In May of 2016, at age 17, I declared that I would set out to find the mystery of the One Piece. And it took a lot longer than I thought. It took me 5 years, thousands and thousands of hours of research, countless rereads of the manga, studying every single page, every data book, every interview with Oda, even going as far as learning Japanese. But as much as I'd love to tell you right away what it is, you probably wouldn't quite understand it without the right context. I need to explain why it makes logical sense in the grander narrative, and because of that, I need to establish what the grander narrative is. After all, the One Piece was created by someone for a purpose, for a reason. And it's understanding those things that will give us the context necessary to understand the One Piece itself. Rather than aimlessly guessing what the treasure could be, I set out to solve every other mystery so that they would all lead me to this final answer, to the point where I would logically understand what it is. So to tell you what the One Piece is, I will unearth all of the lost history. This means finding an answer to almost every major secret in the story, understanding what happened during the Void Century, what was this immense kingdom that Clover spoke of, who was this individual Joy Boy whose name has been echoed across the ages, who are the weapons that were named after gods that seemingly had the power to change the world, who are the fated few who bear the D initial, and what does it stand for, what is this inherited will that is weaved across the ages, and in the end, who is it that will bring all of this together? All of this is what will give us the answer to what One Piece is.
One Piece は実在する!
In Chapter 1000 of One Piece, there was a particularly interesting scene where Ace accidentally revealed to Yamato what Luffy had told him lies at the end of his dream. For those that do not recall what this scene is referencing, it's referring to a scene from Chapter 585, where, after Ace made a declaration that he would prove his life having meaning, Luffy made his own declaration in front of Ace and Sabo. The camera cuts from that scene, not allowing us to hear what Luffy said, only seeing Ace and Sabo reacting. Most people back then thought it was just Luffy declaring he would be Pirate King, just like he declared to Shanks, but some people already found it out back then that Luffy's sentence was cut, making them think he perhaps said something else. This was further hinted at in Chapter 966, where Roger ended up saying the same thing to Oden and Whitebeard. We had no full official confirmation that it was the exact same thing, but the layout of the scene, even down to the bandages on Whitebeard and Oden, made it very clear that Oda was paralleling the two scenes and indicating that Roger had said the same thing that Luffy originally said to Ace and Sabo. And Chapter 1000 outright confirms it, with Yamato claiming that Ace's statement lines up with the record that Oden left in his logbook of what Roger said. And it also confirms that his statement is not something as generic as "I want to be the Pirate King," because Ace claims that this is a goal at the end of Luffy's dream. Since Luffy's dream is quite obviously to be Pirate King, this is a goal that Luffy considers he can only achieve after he becomes the Pirate King. And if anything, this might be hinting at the fact that Luffy can only achieve this dream, or only wants to achieve this dream, after he becomes the Pirate King. This also lines up with something that was said at Sabaody, where in a flashback of Rayleigh, Shanks told him that Luffy uttered the same exact words that Roger once said as well, causing Rayleigh to develop an interest in Luffy. Since Luffy never really said anything else that matched with something Roger said, it's possible that Luffy told Shanks the same thing he told Ace and Sabo during a scene off-screen, because it's something that he always wanted to do, and that Shanks is referring to this very same statement when he was talking to Rayleigh. But then, what is this goal that lies at the end of Luffy's dream? What could it be? Something that Whitebeard considered downright childish? Something that causes people to laugh? Something that sounds so ridiculous that only someone like Luffy or Roger could claim? Well, as a matter of fact, while Oda does not outright reveal it in this chapter, Chapter 1000 might already give us a direct answer to what this goal is. However, to understand that answer, we need to understand Chapter 1000 on a deeper and more fundamental level than one lies at the surface, because Chapter 1000 is a chapter about Luffy and the will he inherited through Ace. This is something that has been established since the very start of the Wano arc. From the very beginning, the arc opened with the story of Otama, a little girl whom Ace had made a promise with. Ace had shipwrecked onto the shores of Kuri, befriended the locals, and promised to take down Kaido in their favor. However, after Ace's death, Tama struggles to coming to terms with this, and yet it's in Luffy that she manages to find what she admired about Ace before. Just in the same way that Ace had once made a promise to help Tama not to starve, Luffy makes that very same promise to her so many years later. And this plotline is continued later in Onigashima, where a very important figure would tie with this plot. This would be none other than Yamato, who had once met Ace many years ago, and later would also come to meet Luffy. Originally, Yamato waited for Ace to come back, to one day set out to sea, but in the end, Ace would never make it back. Yamato had read in Oden's logbook that someday someone would come and lead a new generation of pirates, just as Oden had told Toki a new generation of pirates would make their way into the New World 20 years after Oden's death, and would help inherit his will to open the borders of the Wano country. And Yamato firmly believed that this person was in fact originally Ace, much like how many others, such as Sengoku, also similarly believed that Ace would be the man to lead a new generation of pirates in the future, the exact same generation that Oden mentioned in his journal. But Yamato had realized that this was not the case. As we sadly saw it happen ourselves, Ace was not the person who would lead this new generation, as he would tragically lose his life in the Battle of Marineford. But, just as Whitebeard had put it, just like inherited will, such dreams are things that will never cease to be. At that point, Yamato had realized that Ace was not the one meant to change the world, but instead realized that the one who would do so would be someone else entirely. And who would that person be? Why, it's obvious, because even Ace himself said it. While he was certainly in a league of his own, the number one toughest pirate in this new generation would be his little brother. And it's at that point, particularly when Ace mentioned the goal that lied at the end of Luffy's dream, that Yamato had realized Ace had been right all along. The man who Yamato had been waiting for all these years, the one who had proclaimed that same exact dream that Roger once proclaimed to Oden, was in fact Monkey D. Luffy. And this is what finally explains the full title of Chapter 1000. At first glance, Chapter 1000's title appears to be quite simple, Straw Hat Luffy. A simplistic but effective title. But what if I told you that's not the true full title of the chapter? Because the covers of Chapter 999 and Chapter 1000 were both half covers to a larger color spread included in separate Shonen Jump issues. So if the covers can be combined to make one unique cover, then the titles can as well. And so combining the title of Chapter 999 and Chapter 1000, we get the full true title of Chapter 1000. The Sake Brewed While Waiting for You, Straw Hat Luffy. The one speaking this title is actually Yamato. You wouldn't be able to tell this in English, but in Japanese this is indicated by the use of the Kimi pronoun, which is used by Yamato in Japanese. And so it means that this is Yamato who has been brewing sake while waiting for Luffy. Just as we saw with Ace in Chapter 1000, Yamato wants to exchange sake with Luffy. Okay, but you might say, Arthur, all this stuff is really cool, but what the heck does it have to do with Luffy's true goal? Aren't we going off topic? Well, first of all, we get there when we get there, shut up. Second of all, well, you see, Luffy and Ace's relationship is such a fundamental element of Chapter 1000, and it's the original start of their bond that reveals to us the key clue to understanding what Luffy's dream really is. Let's go back to the original scene, the one that started it all. Luffy telling Ace and Sabo the goal at the end of his dream. Think about it again. What happens before Luffy makes his proclamation? Ace makes his own. And it's not the same proclamation that Roger had made, but something completely unique and different, to give meaning to his life. Which already indicated to us this duality between Luffy and Ace. Ace didn't want to do anything grand like change the world, but he simply wanted to live a life he could be truly proud of. It wasn't his desire in the first place. I simply think that the world government and Whitebeard perhaps came to that conclusion first because of his bloodline being that of the Pirate King, and thinking that fate perhaps is bound by bloodline and all these things, yet it's possible they just had the wrong man this entire time, because the one to achieve this is Luffy, not because of some destined bloodline, but because it's his actual dream. Whitebeard similarly might have already realized before his death, and even the world government seems to be catching on and realizing that Luffy is a bigger piece in this whole thing. But going back to the original thing, the most important clue is not what comes before Luffy's proclamation, but what happens after. Because how does Ace react to Luffy's proclamation of his dream? What does Ace do after Luffy says that he wants to achieve this thing?
お前ら知ってるか？杯を交わすと兄弟になれるんだ。
兄弟？本当かよ！
Ace offers him a cup of sake. Ace, Sabo, and Luffy all decide to exchange sake cups as a symbol of brotherhood, a symbol of friendship. Ace, in a sense, was helping lay down the first step to Luffy's goal. Because the goal that lies at the end of his journey, the goal for Luffy after he finds the One Piece, is to exchange sake with people from all over the world. Or, to put it in better words, what Luffy said is, I want to throw the biggest party in the world. Or something along those lines. I believe the goal at the end of Luffy's dream is to hold the biggest, grandest party in the entire world, to celebrate his victory with so many other people from all over the world, and to exchange drinks with them. Luffy, Ace, and Sabo laid that first step by exchanging cups of sake, and from that point onward, Luffy would always throw a party and share sake cups with those he forms a bond with, and after every accomplishment he achieved. To break it down, in this series, parties usually happen after one or two occasions. Either one, when a new Straw Hat joins, since Luffy wants to exchange sake in a bond of friendship with them, and at the end of almost every major arc after a big victory. This happens at the end of Arlong Park, at the end of Alabasta, Skypiea, and his lobby, Thriller Bark, Fishman Island, Punk Hazard, and so many others. One of the most important examples of these is Dressrosa, where the members of the Grand Fleet offer to exchange cups of sake with Luffy in a formal ceremony. However, Luffy complains against it because he feels it's too formal. Instead, he insists that they don't need such formalities and that they should just form a bond of friendship over something more natural. Which is why right after that, they just had to party together and exchange sake in a far more natural way to Luffy. These parties are something that bring people together. They get people from different races, beliefs, and factions together to celebrate hand in hand, abandoning hatred in favor of laughter. These parties bind, tie, and unite people together no matter where they're from. And that's why Luffy loves parties so much, because it's something that brings people together. I mean, ask yourself, what are the things that Luffy loves more than anything else? Well, you don't have to ask, because Oda already was asked. In the volume 82 of the SBS, Oda mentioned that Luffy's favorite activities are adventuring and partying. It is literally one of the things that Luffy loves the most in this entire world. Even within this arc, remember what Luffy said after Jinbe joined? He wants to wait on the party and wait until they defeat Kaido and Big Mom to celebrate their biggest party yet. And if the party after Onigashima is something that Luffy is looking forward to that much, then imagine just how massive the party at the end of Laugh Tale would be. If the party at the end of Skypiea was enough to unite all the races from the sky and make them stop waging war, then a party at the end of Laugh Tale could be capable of uniting the whole world, to put a stop to the segregation and division that has been present in the world for so many centuries, and uniting all races and all people as one. That's why Oda likes to always draw these parties. In several interviews, Oda has claimed that he really enjoys drawing parties, and that some of his favorite scenes, however, are those of parties. Hell, Oda is even someone who loves parties just as much as Luffy and constantly throws parties at his own mansion with all of his friends and family. In fact, Oda claimed that he doesn't like to draw anything that would ruin the atmosphere to set a party. This is probably why he didn't do a party at the end of Marineford or Whole Cake Island because of Ace and Peter's deaths. The claim of, I want to throw the biggest party in the world is something that sounds so ridiculous, something so childish, that if you heard it, it would make you laugh. Like Whitebeard said, it's something that a little kid would say, something that sounds so silly, yet such a humble ambition to achieve for how grand of a man you'd have to become to carry it out. But for someone like Luffy, it's natural. He doesn't want to be a big pirate, he doesn't want to be someone who rules the world, he just wants to be free. He just wants to share his life with friends. That, at its core, is his true dream, just like he told Rayleigh, but at the end of it, he wants to do something that is so naive and childlike that is so fitting of his personality. And, in fact, we might even be able to deduce where Luffy got this theme from. From the very beginning, from chapter 1 of One Piece, one of the very first things we see in the chapter are the red-haired pirates. Partying. Singing, laughing, drinking, and partying, all while Luffy looks at them in admiration. Shanks even tells them not to fill Luffy's head with crazy ideas, but Luffy is fascinated, both by their claims of how free pirates are and how by one should just have fun and a good time and party. To just laugh, party with friends, and enjoy life. So, Luffy likely made this same declaration to Shanks that one day he would throw the biggest party in the world. And, in fact, that might be why Luffy declared to Shanks that he would become the Pirate King. Because becoming the Pirate King was the only rational way to achieve such a goal. That only as the Pirate King he could throw such a massive party. He tells Shanks he'll gather a crew better than his, one he can celebrate this party with, and that he will surpass him. Both the will of becoming the freest man in the world, to pursue the meaning of freedom, as Roger put it, and the wish to throw the biggest party in the world are the things that drove Luffy to pursue his dream today. Which is why, at Sabaody, Shanks told Rayleigh that Luffy said the same thing Roger once said, because Luffy had made that same declaration to him once in the past. And it makes sense, because Roger was also someone who loved to party. The very first thing that happened after Oden joined the Roger Pirates is participating in a party with the Roger Pirates, which threw away any tension and antagonism that was between them at first. It united them as friends. Across their journey to Laugh Tale, we see them singing and partying as they head there, and after all of it is over, Roger threw a massive party with his crew in chapter 968 to celebrate his achievement, once again exchanging drinks with all of them. Perhaps Roger was not able to accomplish this biggest party in the world like he had wished to, but at the very least he still threw a very big party. And so Luffy set out to sea to accomplish this same goal. This is something I felt like people have never paid enough attention to, but why else do you think that Luffy always insisted on having a musician from the very beginning? Is it just a gag? Or is it because a musician is someone essential to a party? Because a song is the life of a party. And yet there is something even more fundamental to a party than a song. And it's the reason why this thing has been such a fundamental theme across the series. To explain this, I want to reference a scene from Stampede. Stampede is a very important movie because it hints at so many important things about the outcome of the story, many of which haven't even been revealed in the story yet. But something that struck out to me when I first watched this movie in 2019 when I traveled to see it in Japan was a scene where the antagonist of the movie, Douglas Bullet, claimed that relying on others is a weakness, and that the reason why Roger and Whitebeard were dragged down was due to wishing to defend others, believing that relying only on himself will allow him to become the strongest of all. This is a major theme of the movie for Bullet's motivations, and in a particular scene he tells this to Luffy, telling him to get rid of weak people like Usopp because they would only drag him down. But Luffy replies to this not just enraged, but confused. He tells Bullet, "What the hell are you talking about? If I did get rid of others, then who would I have parties with? Are you an idiot?" To Luffy, the idea of getting rid of others seems so fundamentally absurd because without other people, you can't host a party. All by yourself, a party just isn't fun. Bullet laughed at this idea because who even cares about parties when you're talking about ambition? But to Luffy, it's not about ambition. To Luffy, it's something so fundamentally logical because he doesn't care about ambition, he only cares about being free and being able to throw parties, and without anyone, there is no way he can throw a party. Because what point is there in becoming the Pirate King alone if that means you cannot throw a big party afterwards? Because what is more important to achieving Luffy's goal, more than becoming Pirate King, more than anything else, is friends.
だって他に頼りがいねえ。お前を追いかけなかったら俺は一人になる。一人になるのはいてよりつれえ。
That's why friends are so important to Luffy. That is why across this entire series, Luffy has always cherished his friends above all else. The reason he got strong was to be able to protect them so he'd be able to take every single one of them to the final island and be able to throw this massive party. He cherishes them and looks after them because to him, they are the most important thing in the world, more than anything else, more than even his own dream. At Whole Cake Island, Luffy told Sanji that he could not become Pirate King without him. Not that he didn't want to, but that he literally could not. Because without Sanji, without his friend, Luffy could not achieve his goal. At Sabaody, when Luffy lost his friends, he was heartbroken. He felt like he had lost everything. And in the anime, after that, we saw this sequence in Luffy's memory where Luffy reminisces being able to party alongside the Straw Hats. He thinks back to the times they partied together because he realizes he may not be able to party with them ever again. And this is something we see so clearly in chapter 1000. When Kaido and Big Mom ask Luffy to give them this proclamation of being Pirate King just to laugh at his face, Luffy ignores them. He walks past them and just doesn't even think about it. They're not important to him. Luffy defending his dream is not important because at that moment it's not his top priority. His friends are. He rushes to them, picks up Kinemon and makes sure that he's alive. Because to Luffy, if there is one thing that is more important than his dream, is his friends. Because how can you throw a party if you don't have friends? What point is there to life if you can't share it with others? But how does this relate to everything else I said previously in this video? Well, because among all these friends, there's someone who is still missing. Someone who needs to be there alongside Luffy to celebrate the party with. Someone who is not yet part of the crew, but who wants to be a part of it and wants to be able to participate in that party. Yamato. When Ace accidentally told Yamato about Luffy's goal, Yamato mentioned there once was a man who had made that same declaration, and what Ace told Yamato in turn was that, maybe one day I should sit down with him and Luffy for a drink. Ace is saying that he wants to exchange sake with this man, because this is exactly what they were talking about in regards to Luffy's goal, and it's even what they were likely doing at the moment. Ace and Yamato were partying, they were exchanging sake, which is how they likely even came to talk about this in the first place. Just like Oden joined Roger on his journey and saw just how great of a man Roger was, Yamato wants to do the same, to join Luffy on his journey and be a part of that goal that Luffy shares, to see in Luffy what Oden saw in Roger, to party together with Luffy at the ends of the worlds, to exchange sake with him once he's found the One Piece, or, to put it in other words, what Yamato has been holding on to all this time is the sake I brewed while waiting for you, Straw Hat Luffy. The story of Skypiea is one of the most fascinating arcs in all of One Piece. However, some would dare argue that for as wondrous as it may be, it feels detached and unrelated to the rest of the grander story. In fact, some would even dare say that you should skip the arc altogether. But I would argue that not only is the Skypiea arc vitally important to the story in many ways, but that the story of the people of the sky reflects the story of the world below. And in a lot of ways, it completely parallels and foreshadows the entire series from start to end. And most importantly of all, it foreshadows exactly how One Piece will end. The story of Skypiea is a microcosm of the story of the world of One Piece, because despite being isolated from everyone else, its inhabitants are no different than humans, and so similar events and history repeated over both worlds. Thus, if we take a look at the history of Skypiea, we'll be able to understand the history of the world of One Piece and what actually happened before, during, and after the Void Century. The parallels between this civilization and the rest of the world will help us understand exactly not just that, but also what is going to be the final scene and resolution of the series once the One Piece treasure is discovered. However, I'd like to start things off by taking a look not at the history of the sky, but starting off with the history of the world below, to then later understand the parallels that link the two. In the previous episode, we established our main premise for this thesis about what Luffy's true dream is, that being to throw the biggest party in the world. However, now that we have established that foundation, it is time to go back in time and go through all the events of the history of the world of One Piece from the very start. And to achieve that, we'll have to start at the very, very beginning of everything. Before the main story, before the Void Century, before all the events that unfolded in this world, at the beginning of everything. At first, there was nothing, and then there was light, a big bang which gave birth to the known universe. And somewhere, in the corner of some galaxy, a world was born. This world, much like our own, passed through one of many geological eras, shifting and evolving through millions and even billions of years, eventually leading to its biggest change: the birth of life. At first, species were aquatic, but eventually moved on to land. These species grew and evolved, leading to the era of the dinosaurs. At some point, the world became covered mostly in water, with thousands of islands scattered all over. At this stage, the world resembled a lot more how it currently looks. However, I would dare state that its two most distinct features, the supercontinent Red Line and the ocean Grand Line, at that time did not yet exist. But we'll tackle that subject later. Either way, none of this really matters much at the present, because regardless of the geological eras and regardless of the dinosaurs and other life forms, the true protagonists of this story would be mankind. Evolved from the same common ancestors as today's apes, a new race made its way into the world. Humans. Homo sapiens. And yet what truly sets this world apart from ours was that not only did humans appear, but many other types of hominids did as well. Races that aren't quite identical to humans, but possess very similar body shapes, opposite thumbs, bipedal builds, and most importantly, the same level of intelligence. Unlike our world, its people are not just differentiated by their gender and their skin color, but also by their fins, their fur, their wings, or their sizes. Alongside humans, many more creatures began to populate the world. And this is not counting other types of races and subspecies, or the difference between the individuals within each race, such as the countless classifications for fishfolk, merfolk, or minks. The sheer variety the world offered in its inhabitants provided a beautiful amount of diversity, with so many different creatures, with different abilities, strengths, and attributes. Cultures began to form around the world, and through the invention of ships, exploration became available, leading to the colonization of more and more territories. Kingdoms arose and civilizations developed. We know that kingdoms like that of Alabasta have existed for well over 4,000 years, becoming major political powers ever since ancient times. All these events led to all these different species and cultures to interact together. One would imagine that with such diversity, such varied skill sets, yet so much in common, all of these races would be able to put their unique traits to good use and build a prosperous future together. But sadly, the truth of history is far darker than that. Hidden beneath these lofty ideals lied a violent and blood-stained history. People are so much more than just wild beasts. They are intelligent, they value emotion, heart, and have morals and values. They value peace and joy. Yet at their core, they are also deeply driven by their instincts, by their weaknesses. In a survivalist mentality, what is right to work is what is safer, and so we become afraid of the different. Ideally, it is through courage that man thrusts himself into the different and learns to understand it to better make use of it. But history has shown us that not everybody has that courage, and many were frightened by the different. In spite of all that these races share together, in spite of sharing the same red blood, their differences scared them. Their differences frightened them, and this fear led to seeing each other as threats, shifting the blame onto others and treating them like creatures who are inferior. This feeling is not one that belonged to one singular race either. But there was one critical detail that completely changed how these events developed. These races all differed in strength. Humans were strong, but the likes of fishmen, dwarves, or giants were stronger by biological nature. Yet for as powerful as they were, there was one attribute that they all lacked: numbers. And that is what humans likely had above all else. No matter how weak they might have been, humans were just more numerous. Their strength in numbers allowed them to become the majority, making them the normal, and everything else that which was inferior. Any hope for equality was shattered, turning into seeds of discrimination, prejudice, and racism. Racism is a very major theme in One Piece. It may not seem like it at first glance, but I'd go as far as to argue that it's a driving force for the core theme of the entire series. While some might think that this is just a way to offer political commentary in our world, which, By all means, it is. It is also fundamentally rooted across the entire world of One Piece, because the truth is, racism has plagued the history of the world of One Piece, much like it has plagued that of our own. We have seen firsthand the effects that racism has had on the fishfolk and the merfolk, with humans treating them as nothing more than fishes, something that has been explored in great lengths during the Sabaody and Fishman Island arcs. But we've also seen this in so many other cases. For example, according to Gancho, the chief of the Tontata, even prior to the Void Century, dwarves had been hunted by humans for a very long time. They were seen as nothing more than an amusing creature, an animal to be caught as a collector's item, to be hunted like bugs. They were eventually approached by the human king of Dressrosa, King Don Quixote, to be provided shelter, but even he betrayed them and enslaved them, paving the way for what would become known as the Great Tontata Era of Slavery, a brutal, ruthless, and merciless period of time, which remaining records describe as nothing short of a living hell. Even in current cases in the story, such as with someone like Pudding, we've seen the degree of discrimination that they can go through. Despite how varied Totoland can be, Pudding's third eye was rare enough that she was bullied and discriminated against for it. Even her own mother, for as much as she wants to pretend to live in her delusional world of equality, she too claimed to be creeped out by her eye, viewing her like a weird monster. It would be years until Pudding would meet someone who did consider her beautiful for being different. And even in isolated cases like the Wano country, we've seen how Kawamatsu and his mother were discriminated against for being different from the rest of humans there, ultimately leading to his mother's death, asking her son to lie about his race to protect his own life. There are countless and countless other accounts of discrimination across the series, yet there is one detail that you might not have thought about that goes to show just how persecuted the races of the world really are. Let's play a game. Try to imagine a random island in the series and try to picture the people living there. What do you see? Chances are, if you haven't chosen one of the few unique exceptions, the island you visualized is filled with humans. Only humans. Aside from Totland and some other exceptions, such as pirate crews, we really haven't seen any of the world's many races ever coexisting much with humans. All of those islands are filled with so many humans, sure, but only humans, because after all, if that racism is so deeply rooted, how could all these races live alongside humans? Take another example, the Marines. Think about all the Marines we've seen across the series. They're all humans. Now admittedly, there is an exception because giants are also in the Marines, but as Law explained, that is simply a special exception given their unbelievable military power. But aside this rare exception, has there ever been any other Marine who wasn't human? Any fishmen, skyfolk, even long arms or long legs? No, they're all humans. The world government, the world nobles, the Marines, and their many kingdoms are all filled with just that. Humans. So if humans were the prevailing species, where could all the other races go? If humans could hunt them down, where could they escape to? The answer is to places where humans could not reach them. The one advantage some of these races had was that they had specific traits or circumstances which allowed them to access places that humans could not reach. For example, the fishfolk and merfolk could breathe underwater, so they went to live on the seafloor, because no human could ever reach them there. Fishman Island was said to have originally been a popular gathering spot of seafolk because it was where the roots of the Sun Tree Eve reached, making it the only place in the seafloor where light arrives. They might have fish-like attributes, but in the end, seafolk are no different from humans. They love the sun. The sun brings them joy. Of course, this sunlight of the ocean could never compare to the light of the real sun, but that was nothing more than a dream for them. Similar is the story of the minks. Persecuted by humans, they could do nothing more than go live on the back of the colossal elephant Zunisha to survive and stay away from humans, allowing them to vanish on this unreachable island, isolating themselves for centuries. And the same can be said for a lot of other races. The giants stayed at Elbaf and became a culture of warriors because it was the only way to protect themselves. The Kujas sought refuge at Amazon Lily, a natural fortress made to defend from enemies. Much like the giants, the Kuja learned to be warriors and prioritize strength above all else in their culture, replacing outdated ideals of beauty being defined by one's attractiveness to beauty being defined by one's strength. And they also created the law of outlawing any men from reaching the island, because most of their enemies happened to be men, and a force of women alone would likely not be able to stand against them. Whether it's the Minks being trained to be like warriors since birth, or the tribal warrior culture of the Shandians, all of these species had to fight to even stay alive, and so their cultures became like those of warriors. While others, like the dwarves, were not as lucky, becoming enslaved by humans, though the few that could escape became fierce warriors and hid in the ground away from the eyes of humans. All of these show us that racism was very much present across this world's history, and that it nearly drove so many of these races to extinction, forcing them to seek refuge in parts of the world where they would not be pursued. This element might not seem as important now, but trust me, keep it in mind, because as we move forward, this history of racism will become one of the fundamental catalysts for the existence of the One Piece. However, we're forgetting one race, aren't we? The Skyfolk. What place could they go where they could ensure that humans would never pursue them there? You might think at first the Sky Island, sure, but what if they went beyond? To the farthest reach, the final frontier, the moon. There is a bit of a misconception in our community that the Skyfolk were born on the moon. After all, we know they came down from the moon, making some think that the species originated there. But that's not how evolution works. Skyfolk are obviously hominids, they possess the same traits as humans and evidently had a common ancestor, meaning that both originated from the same place, much like how all humans in our world are said to come from Africa. They were clearly not born on the moon, but rather were born on the planet below and went up there at some point. And I mean, it makes sense. If once upon a time they had wings as large as kings, they could have just flown there. We've seen the moon, unlike ours, is not really that impossible to reach and is somewhere closer to the point where it likely is covered by the atmosphere, allowing living beings to breathe there. We saw how easily Enel got there with his ship, or how the automata flew there with literally just balloons, so it's not absurd to think the Skyfolk just flew there. Flew so far to a point that no human could ever reach them, to a paradise where they could live in peace without the meddling of humans. Or in other words, an utopia. The capital of Burka they founded on the moon was truly an utopia. Undisturbed, they were able to progress and advance as a society, developing their technology to an impressive level. After all, war, hatred, and the opposition of progress are what stagnates societies. And it is those that are able to be open-minded and peaceful that manage to make the biggest technological leaps. Thanks to that, Skyfolk invented machinery, advanced mechanism, and even sentient species of robots known as the automata. Regardless, the Skyfolk, referred to as the Moonfolk during this period, were able to lead forward this prosperous society, this utopia known as the Moon City of Burka. It truly was a beautiful society, one where there was no discrimination nor prejudice. But for as wonderful as it was, there was one critical flaw that put an end to this civilization: resources. For as peaceful as the moon was, its resources were limited. No wildlife, no trees or water, only a wasteland of earth. Life in the moon was simply not realistic anymore, and so, as depicted on the moon murals we saw in the cover story, the moonfolk abandoned their home and returned to the planet below, where war and persecution were certainly still threats, but where they at least could survive in some form or another. On the moon, the moonfolk already seemed to have split into 3 different factions, 3 specific sub-races with mild biological differences. The original names are unknown, but today these are known as the Shandorians, more tribalistic in nature and with mid-sized wings, the Skypians with slightly smaller wings and a cultural tendency to style their hair in the shape of antennae, and finally the Burkans, who possess larger and more angled wings. These 3 factions were a bit distinct from each other, but in spite of their differences, they managed to live together in harmony. However, when they descended to the planet below, they eventually parted ways. As we currently know, the Moonfolk, now the Skyfolk, divided themselves to live in 3 different islands. The island of Jaya, where the city of Shandora was located, and the Sky Islands Skypiea and Burka. It is unclear why one of the three factions lived in the Blue Sea and the others lived in the sky, but it's possible that they all descended to the Blue Sea at first, as indicated by the moon murals, but two of these races eventually discovered that clouds were inhabitable, finding a new place to stay away from humans. These sky islands were still a far cry from the moon, as humans could still reach them via several traveling methods, but at least it gave them a bit more peace than the land below could. However, for as heavenly as the sky was, and for all the resources it did provide, ironically, it lacked the one resource they had always possessed. The one resource they had so much of to the point it was superfluous, despite lacking all other resources. Earth, or Verth, as they called it in their culture. Because the moon was just that, a wasteland of Earth. And yet in the sky, Earth was the one thing that just was not available. Without Earth, they couldn't plant or grow crops, which made it a very valuable resource. The sky folk yearned for the Verth, and most importantly, they yearned for their homeland. The moon folk would never return to the moon. What was once an utopia free of hatred and discrimination was simply not realistically sustainable anymore. And yet this yearning for the moon never disappeared. This yearning became symbolized in the Verth itself, the one thing they had in abundance in their utopia, but lacked in their new countries. The moon thus became part of Skyfolk legend and religion. This legendary land, this utopia, came to be known as Fairy Verth, a legendary land that all Skyfolk yearn for, a true paradise. That is why they named each of their new homelands with names based on the original homeland. Burka, the name of the ancient moon city, Chandra, which is based on Chandra, the Hindi deity of the moon, and Skypiea, a combination of the sounds for sky and utopia. Across the entirety of the arc of Skypiea, we are told of this fairy Verth, this land of eternal earth, this paradise that all the Skyfolk seek. Yet the story never specifies what it is. Enel refers to it as this dreamlike utopia. He yearns to go there because he feels like it's a fitting place for a god, and at the very end it's revealed that all this time Fairy Verth was the moon. But what Enel failed to realize is that it was an utopia not because it was some paradise worthy of a god, but because it was a place free of persecution, free from human hatred. It was the utopia that all the Skyfolk once lived at, something that over time became nothing more than the stuff of legends. In chapter 244, we stumble upon an earth idol located at the center of Angel Island, a religious figure for the Skyfolk. When describing the idol, Kanis explains,
それはバース。空に住む人々の永遠の憧れそのものです。
おめえらこんなに憧れんのか？
ええ、正解の人たちには理解しがたいものですね、きっと。
Because this eternal yearning was to return to their homeland, the moon, to Fairy Verth itself. Something that the Skyfolk eternally yearn for, something that normal humans could never comprehend, the desire to return to their long-lost utopia. One where they could be safe away from humans, where they could simply be at peace. That was all that they wanted. I feel that many people often overestimate the importance of the moon in the series, like it's the key to everything and something massively important. And while it is true that the moon does hold quite a bit of symbolism and has impacted other cultures beyond that of the Skyfolk, something that holds true in our own world as well, I don't think this importance is to the degree that some chalk it up to be. I've seen some people speculate that the moon is perhaps where the Great Kingdom is located, or the celestial dragons are aliens who came from the moon, or that it's the One Piece itself, but honestly, no. I just don't think it's as important as some people think it is. Its presence in the story has been relegated to just a cover story, one most anime fans don't even have an idea exists, and even that is just a continuation of the story of Skypiea. The story of the moon is the story of the Skyfolk, a part of the story of Skypiea, as simple as that. But it's understanding the story that is really important to understanding the greater whole, and you'll understand very soon why. However, back to our story, the characteristic of yearning for Verth is something that only afflicted the Skyfolk that lived in the sky, because the Shandorians eventually moved on. For them, Earth was plenty, and this time they had both the Earth and the resources to sustain themselves, and since they assumed a tribalistic and warrior-like culture, that allowed them to fend themselves against humans quite well, so they simply moved on. They moved on with their lives and moved on from the legend of the moon. They would come to worship their own gods and craft their own culture, completely detached from that of the sky. And eventually, one day, they would also come to forge friendship with humans. However, in an ironic twist of fate, the destinies of both the people of the sky and the skyfolk of the sea would one day once again intertwine with each other. On one fated day 400 years in the past, a knock-up stream erupted beneath the island of Jaya, shooting it into the sky. The island would land near Skypiea, making the people of that land feel like that chunk of Jaya, the enormous amount of earth, was a gift bestowed to them, one that they were in the right to possess. This led to war. Both factions wanted this large chunk of earth for themselves, giving start to a war that would last for entire 4 centuries. Things took a turn for the worse when eventually the Vulcans invaded as well, led by a youth by the name of Enel. Enel proclaimed himself the god of the skies, and driven by desire of power, he annihilated and destroyed his country of Burka, leaving as survivors only those who had left the island at some point in the past, and those Enel took with him to invade Skypiea. This conflict between 2 countries became a conflict between 3, making the situation even more dire. But the true irony of it all is the fact that while all these factions came from different places, different islands in the sky and the blue sea, they were all skyfolk, yet they still saw each other as different. These people who had once lived side by side in this peaceful utopia were at their throats over something they could have easily shared. All the more ironic because the Shandians had once managed to set apart their differences with another race, but in an attempt to preserve that bond, they ended up creating such a long and bloodstained struggle. All they needed to understand was that if they could share this earth with each other, then this entire conflict would be solved. The solution to this war was simply to unite everyone together, and yet they could never achieve that. In that regard, the history of the Moon and Skypiea is the perfect micro-example of how things were for the rest of the world. Their history is a replica of the history of the world, and understanding how things developed on Skypiea will help us comprehend how things would develop everywhere else. Because much like the rest of the world, Skypiea was in a situation where those of different races would fight against each other just because of their differences, leading to this endless cycle of hatred and fear that would continue across the generations, being taught to future children. This led to a 400-year-long war, one that seemed like it would never, ever end. Until one day, a certain boy appeared. One day, a young boy would finally land on Skypiea, not in search of war or conquest, but simply in search of adventure. And much like he would one day change the history of the world, this boy changed the history of Skypiea by bringing everybody there together. He rose to defeat the one who was playing at being God, and helped put a stop to this long war by connecting all those different races as one, by spreading joy among the people of the sky. But how could he achieve that? What could this man possibly do? What could he possibly bring that would be so revolutionary to bring joy to the people of the sky and stop this hatred that persisted for centuries in a single instant?
そう、自分の目で確かめるがよい。人々は今誰一人戦いなど望んではいない。
This joyous boy helped connect all those who had been divided for so many centuries through the simple act of throwing a massive party. A party where everyone could throw away hatred and discrimination and instead indulge in joy and laughter. And it is this massive party that would not only connect all people together as equals, but it is also this massive party that would allow everyone to finally laugh together. And one day, eventually, this boy would throw a party so big that it would connect the entire world together, connecting those who were scattered and divided, and uniting them as one, just like he did for the people of the sky. But of course, that is a story we haven't reached yet. And for this boy to accomplish such a grand feat, he would need a massive treasure, one that could quite literally bring the world together in one piece. But that is a story no one yet knows about. Who was Joy Boy? Who is this individual whose name has echoed across the ages? What type of person was he, and what were his ideals? And most importantly, what is it that drove him to create the One Piece? Well, to understand that, we first need to understand how the world was before he was born. And, as we talked about, we've seen that the world of One Piece has always been steeped in racism and discrimination. While racism is not inherently bound to one particular race, the sheer superiority in numbers of the humans resulted in them persecuting most of the other races. Most human societies would thrive on their own, driving other races away. Because of this, the other races sought remote locations to escape this discrimination. The fishfolk and merfolk went to live on the seafloor, the minks went to live on the back of a giant elephant, and the skyfolk went to live on the moon, and later on the Sky Islands. Those who remained on the blue sea, such as the Kuja, the Giants, or the Shandorians, had to become fierce warriors in order to keep intruders away. The races that couldn't adapt, like the dwarves, fell under the submission of humans. Humans had simply accepted this as their natural right. They were the ones in power, they were the ones who had the advantage in numbers, and because of that, the race became the normal. Humans were the de facto rulers of the world, they had a monopoly in it, and those oppressed had no other choice but to submit or fight to survive. And while it's important to understand that these different races were being discriminated against, this is something that did not apply to just them, but even humans themselves. Because even among humans, there existed a hierarchy. The powerful and rich, and the common folk, the poor. The common folk had no choice but to follow those above them, and even below them were those in even more miserable conditions. Slaves, deprived of any and all freedom, or the oppressed, ruled over by tyrants. Millions had to suffer and submit for the privilege of just a few select at the top. And because those at the top held the power, no one could change how the world worked. Freedom was nothing more than a dream. However, at one point, one boy arose to reject this very belief, and to challenge the whole world to a fight. The name of this boy has been lost to history, but there was another name he was known by. An epithet that encapsulated who this person was at their core. Someone who was known as Joy Boy. But who was Joy Boy? For someone who is at the very center of all of these mysteries, he's rarely ever been mentioned, if at all. So for first step, let's gather together all that we know about him for a fact. Number 1, while the presence of a figure like Joy Boy was something that was hinted at across the entire series, the first time he was ever named was in a poneglyph found at Fishman Island, which is a written record of an apology by Joy Boy to the mermaid princess of the Void Century. There he apologized for not being able to keep a certain promise that he made with the people of Fishman Island, seemingly involving the Noah Ark. Neptune claimed that keeping the Noah Ark safe was their duty to fulfill their part of the promise, keeping it intact until a certain day arrived. Otohime shed more light on this, explaining that one day a man would arise and guide this new mermaid princess to using her powers the right way, leading to a big change in the world. This was also mentioned by Oden, claiming that the borders of the Wano country had to open for when Joy Boy arrived. And more importantly, during his execution, he even implied that this man, supposedly Joy Boy, would travel across 800 years into the future. But this poses a very odd question. What did Oden mean by Joy Boy traveling across 800 years? Is he immortal? A time traveler? Someone sent by Toki? A spirit? Or something else? Well, that's a question we'll leave for later. Because at present, I just want to focus on who Joy Boy was back in the day, and I want to focus on the biggest clue that we've gotten about him. The fact that Joy Boy was the one who left behind the One Piece. That is undeniably a massive revelation, which completely recontextualized a lot of things, but truth be told, I had already long since realized that was likely the case by the time it was revealed in the manga, because I had realized exactly this. Joy Boy was undeniably a very important figure, perhaps the most important figure in the entirety of the Void Century, and I think in that regard, Joy Boy held one of the most important positions in the world. He was potentially the ruler, the king, of the Great Kingdom. But to explain why I think that is the case, we need to first better understand what the Great Kingdom itself was. For being such an important faction in the story of the Void Century and the center of so many theories, much like Joy Boy, it's odd to think that the Great Kingdom has really only been properly mentioned and explained once. During Robin's flashback, Clover told the Gorosei that through the research of the poneglyph they had found and other documents that had survived the Great Purge, they discovered the existence of this Great Kingdom. Now, it is important to note that while this is the name commonly used by fans, it's not exactly the most accurate of translations. Great isn't really a title, but really just an adjective that Clover used to describe the kingdom, which is actually more translatable to immense, or in Japanese, Kyodai na Okoku. However, I will still be using Great Kingdom to refer to it, since it is the term that the fandom is most familiar with anyway. But yeah, in other words, Clover said that they found the existence of an immense kingdom. Immense implies a sense of size, scope, though it may not necessarily mean actual, tangible, physical size, such as living on a massive island. Rather, I think he meant that the kingdom was so immense because it wasn't limited by any natural borders. More on that later. The kingdom was furthermore said to boast mighty power, though it is never specified if this power was used for good or for evil. This indicates that either they had a lot of manpower as part of their immense influence, or perhaps it might have even been referring to the existence of the ancient weapons, which the Great Kingdom is implied to be connected to. As we know, the kingdom had an enemy, and this enemy was an alliance of different human kingdoms, who would later become the founders of the world government. And what Clover theorized is that the reason why the world government erased all information about the Great Kingdom is not because they feared the ancient weapons or because they feared the power of the kingdom, but because they feared its ideals. What frightened the government the most was not the power of the kingdom, but the ideals that said kingdom embodied. Or in other words, it's possible that the government feared Joy Boy's ideals. And it's these ideals that Joy Boy held so close to his heart that helped tie and connect everything together. Because what do you think were Joy Boy's ideals? Or in other words, what was Joy Boy's dream? Well, try to ask yourself this instead. If you had to put it in one word, what would you say is the biggest theme in all of One Piece? What single theme do you think perfectly encapsulates everything this story is about? What do you think is, at its core, the fundamental ideal that the characters of this tale pursue?
この海で一番自由なやつが海賊王だ。
Joy Boy's ideal, Joy Boy's dream, the one that the world government fears so much, was most likely an ideal of freedom. In his heart, what Joy Boy always desired was to be free, the freest man in the world. And I think that at first, Joy Boy was nothing more than just a young lad who set out to sea. A young kid from a small island who wanted to be free. And so the only way he could do that, the only way he could be free, was by becoming a pirate. I believe that Joy Boy became a pirate simply because it was the only way to be free. Much like in our world, which was incredibly oppressed at the time, pirates set out to sea for the purpose of living a free life. Oppression leads to a desire of freedom, which leads to a surge in pirates. And at its core, One Piece is a pirate story. If you think back on our own world's history, the reason why pirates emerged was for freedom. During a time where the common folk were oppressed by those in power and freedom was almost non-existent if you weren't on the privileged side, pirates sailed to sea to be free and not be bound by the dichotomy of society. Many of them might have been cruel and have caused many horrible actions, sure, something that we also see reflected in the world of One Piece. But among them, there were also others who had more noble ambitions. A defining trait of pirates in our world is that they broke through a lot of the social boundaries that divided humans. They saw people who had different skin colors as fellow humans, and shared their ideals of freedom with them by forming pirate crews of mixed races. Does that sound familiar? They broke through the idea of racism to bring everyone together, which is exactly what we see pirates and especially Joy Boy do in the world of One Piece. Joy Boy, much like all these pirates, left his hometown and set out to sea to pursue his dream of freedom. He traveled the world, visited so many islands, gathered a large crew, and met so many people. Joy Boy was not afraid of those who were different. He was a pirate, someone who shared that freedom with everybody, regardless of their race. He made friends with all types of people. Fishmen, Shandians, minks, Kuja, giants, and all sorts of races. Joy Boy gathered a large crew, made many allies across the world, and eventually, at some point, grew so powerful that he established a kingdom of pirates. Much like how pirates in our world did the same, establishing pirate kingdoms like that of Tortuga or Libertalia, pirate kingdoms where pirates could live free, Joy Boy established his own pirate kingdom in this world. He founded a kingdom where people could be free, where they could be pirates like him and party together hand in hand. Joy Boy ruled not as a monarch, but as a friend. And this position perhaps might have been what led him to being called by his people as the Pirate King. And this kingdom was located none other than at the ends of the world, on an island that would one day come to be known as Laugh Tale. While it hasn't been confirmed officially yet, it's something that has been strongly implied across the series. After all, the 4 road poneglyphs lead to this location, and it would make sense that if Joy Boy left the One Piece anywhere, it would be at his home kingdom. But even more clear is the fact that the image that both Crocus and Inuarashi visualized of Laugh Tale is identical to the image of the Great Kingdom that Clover visualized. This island, this kingdom, was key to the Void Century. But this kingdom was not really a traditional kingdom. Sure, it had a home base island, that much is made clear, but I think the kingdom encapsulates not a territory, but its people, scattered all over the world. As Clover put it, the kingdom had become enormous, not because of a large territory, but because its people were scattered all over the world, as it included all the allies and friends Joy Boy had met on his journey. But I think what is most important to understand when it comes to Joy Boy's dream is that it's not something that he did for selfish reasons. Joy Boy did not become the ruler of the Great Kingdom because he craved power and control, or to rule over the world, but because he wanted to be free. And the only way he could be free was for everybody to be free. Joy Boy desired freedom not just for himself, but for everybody. Joy Boy wanted to bring freedom to those who had none, to those oppressed, to create a world where everyone was free, one where all could sail the seas in adventure without being shackled down by the restrictive mindset of society. After all, how can you be free if no one is free? True freedom isn't achieved by robbing it away from others, but by sharing it with everyone. Joy Boy wanted to turn the system, the entire world, upside down and finally bring freedom to everyone in the world. This meant putting a stop to slavery, to the social hierarchy, to the system those tyrannical humans' kingdoms had created, but most importantly, to put a stop to racism and discrimination. Joy Boy wanted freedom not just from slavery and social boundaries, but also freedom for those who were oppressed, freedom for those minorities who were persecuted and hunted down for centuries. Joy Boy wanted a world where everyone was truly equal, not just by demolishing the political constructs that oppressed others, but also by breaking down the racial barriers that had kept people divided. Joy Boy really wanted to unite everyone and unify the world as one piece. And it's the specific objective that really ties everything together. Because once you start to think about it, it's already been confirmed in so many ways that Joy Boy was someone who wanted to achieve equality for all the races of the world. We see this in the fact that so many of the poneglyphs of the Great Kingdom were mostly left to different races. The Shandians, the Fishmen, the Mink, etc. And particularly this bond between Joy Boy and other races is something we see so clearly in Joy Boy's relationship with the Fishmen. He was an ally of the Fishmen, but even more importantly, Joy Boy made a promise with them. The details of this promise have never been specified, but we can easily deduce what it really was, because the promise is something that involved the Noah Ark, and, well, put quite simply, what is the purpose of an ark? The purpose of an ark is to emigrate people, to help a very large number of people to emigrate and head somewhere else. What Joy Boy had promised to the Fishmen was to transfer them to the surface. He promised he would change the world to a point where they could live in the surface alongside humans without fear of being persecuted. Joy Boy had the Noah built to help the entire population of Fishman Island emigrate to the surface. As the Sea Kings put it It was likely that clan, the D clan, that built this arc in the first place. Mass immigration is not simple, especially through such a dangerous journey that we've been told many times is very difficult to undertake. But this arc would be big enough to ensure everyone would be safely transported to the surface. The ship was designed with enormous chains that Sea Kings could pull, the only realistic way in which a ship of this size could be carried, which would be done with the help of Poseidon's authority. So, working together, Joy Boy and Poseidon could help the fishmen move to the surface and help them live alongside humans. And this is something that is confirmed to us in a scene in chapter 621, where Neptune described that Otohime's dream is the same dream her ancestors had, shown over the backdrop of the Noah Ark. And as we know very well, Otohime's dream is to move the population of Fishman Island to the surface. For years, she worked hard to convince her subjects to move there, to trust humans, and have the courage to face them, to be able to coexist with them, that love could prevail over fear, and that there was a place for people to live together. Or, to put in her own words, what Otohime always sought after was the day where everyone could live under the same sun. Because it's that yearning for the sun that unites people together. Just like Otohime mentioned, the fishmen gathered at the roots of the sun tree Eve because it was the only place in the seafloor where they could get a taste of sunlight. But to them, sunlight just isn't enough. They know deep down in their hearts that they yearn to see the real sun. They want to live under the same sun as all the humans. And that is because the sun is a symbol of union. Scientifically speaking, the rays of the sun result in a chemical reaction that releases serotonin in our brains, bringing us joy, which is why the light of the sun have become symbols of joy and hope. It's why people consider sunny days to be good days and cloudy days to be bad days, because the sun, quite simply, scientifically, brings people joy. And that is precisely the type of joy and hope that Joy Boy wanted to bring, symbolized by the sun itself, a light that could bask and embrace all in the world, regardless of who they are, to bring them joy. That is why he came to be known exactly as just that. Joy Boy, the boy who brought joy. Hey, hello, this is Arthur from the future here, so allow me to interrupt this for just a second. So this episode was originally edited and finished all the way back in May of 2021, but since then Oda has introduced a story element that basically spoils just about everything I wanted to explain here, so wow, thanks Oda. Jokes aside, I'm talking of course about the sun god Nika, and given his importance, I thought I'd at least make a quick inclusion to talk about him in this episode. The figure of Nika, in my eyes, is undoubtedly that of Joy Boy. Just like Who's Who explained it, this legendary figure from ancient times is someone who symbolized the sun, being perceived by some as the god of the sun. Nika is someone who brought joy and laughter to slaves and those who were oppressed, something that is emphasized by his own name, likely Joy Boy's true name, either first or last name, being Nika, because Nika is one of the Japanese sound effects that can be used for laughter. And thus, much like the sun, Nika was someone who brought joy and laughter to everyone in the world. And of course, I'm sure I don't need to point out how it is that he did that, because a simple glance will make it clear that Nika looks like he's dancing and partying, being nearly identical to the figure of Luffy partying in Skypiea, just like we mentioned last episode. And just as legend says, the day Joy Boy reappears, he will deliver a party that will connect the entire world together, and through it, he will bring laughter and joy to everyone. The man who was just like the sun, someone whose shining light could bring joy to all he formed a bond with. This union of friendship, of nakama, that is the bond that Joy Boy formed with his crewmates, with his allies and with his friends, and the bond he wanted to form with everyone in the world, symbolized by the sun.
絵空に描く幻想よりも太陽へと続く道。
俺の仲間になれよ。
This is shown over an image of Otohime's grave and Joy Boy's Noah arc, showing that all those years later, through Joy Boy and through Otohime, we're seeing once again a connection of friendship between different races being made to forge a path towards the sun that will unite everyone. This bond of friendship, this pirate bond, is a bond of nakama, a special bond that ties people together, no matter the race, no matter who they are, and it's the symbol of the sun that ties together Joy Boy and his allies, not just symbolically, but as an actual symbol. For example, the fishmen have this fascination with the sun, and so the fishermen pirates would eventually use the mark of the sun to brand themselves. But not just that, the brand of the sun was used to raise the brand of the celestial dragons. They were quite literally replacing the symbol of the government with the symbol of the sun, to indicate that they were free. And keep in mind, this is a mark that appeared as early as East Blue, meaning it's something that Oda likely had in mind ever since the very start. Similarly, the Kosuke clan, other allies of the Great Kingdom, also bear a small sun within their crest. The Minks also use that crest as a symbol given their ties with the Kosuke clan. The Shandians have also shown to have imagery of suns in their decorations as well. In fact, on Wiper's arm we can see the symbol of the sun tattooed on it. The flag of the Kuja, while a bit more of a stretch since it's meant to represent the head of a Gorgon, does also sort of look a bit like a sun. And while Elbaf does not have such a mark, they do have a festivity that celebrates the sun. In Big Mom's flashback, we learn of the solstice celebration, where the people of Elbaf fast for several days to celebrate, in their words, the rebirth of the sun. And did you notice something about all these different countries? All of them are from different races, from different minorities. These even included humans such as the Kosuke clan or Joy Boy himself, but the fishmen, the minks, the skyfolk, the Kuja, the giants, almost all the oppressed races of the world were allied with Joy Boy because they all believed in the same objective, in the same sun that tied all of them together. Together they worked to change the world because they truly believed that the sun could prevail. And that is exactly what Joy Boy strived to do. That was his goal. That was what he put so much effort towards in order to unite the world. Joy Boy's dream was to be free. He wanted to be more free than any person in the world, and to achieve that, he became the Pirate King, the freest man in the seas. And as a king, he founded an immense kingdom of pirates, one that was not bound by territory or monarchical rules, but that united and connected people all across the world. But Joy Boy wanted freedom for more than just himself or his people. He wanted freedom for everyone in the world. He wanted to free those who were oppressed. He defeated many tyrannical rulers on his journey, but he didn't want to stop there. He wanted to free the entire world. Joy Boy wanted to quite literally change the world and usher in a new era that would change it. Across the series we hear this expression, the swell of an era, which is an expression that indicates a new era that will bring about change will come. And we are told time and time again that a new era is going to come. And that is exactly what Joy Boy wanted to do, to bring a new era that would change how the world worked. To bring everybody together, to live under the same sun, instead of fighting against each other, to party alongside them hand in hand. That was the goal that lied at the end of Joy Boy's dream, to unite the world through the sun, something that was symbolized by the sun itself. Joy Boy wanted to bring the rise of the sun to the whole world, to start a new era that would change things for everyone. And yet, we all know how things ended. Joy Boy was not able to bring this party to the whole world. The winners were the humans. They won the war, they defeated Joy Boy, and prevailed. They erased all traces that were made of him to make sure that his ideals would never be inherited. They doubled down on their oppression and made sure that no one could take power away from them. They founded a world government, an organization that held a stranglehold on the world, ensuring that no one could ever be free again and steal their privilege away from them. But even so, for as much as they attempted to wipe away any traces of Joy Boy, his will, his dream, and the era he sought to bring, these are things that will never cease to be.
受け継がれゆく意志、時代のうねり、人の夢。人々が自由の答えを求める限り、それらは決してとどまることはない。
Joy Boy knew, even if he was defeated, that one day someone would complete his dream, that someone would inherit his will and bring forth this destined era. He knew that even if the world government tried to purge the light, he knew that even if the sun would be engulfed by a long and dark night, that one day someone would appear that would bring an end to that night. Someone would make the sun rise once again, and it would be that sun that would bring joy and would bring everybody together. To usher in a new tomorrow where everyone could stand side by side, with no prejudice, no discrimination, but connected through a bond of brotherhood, of friendship, of nakama, and to do something as silly as throwing a massive party together, all united under the same sun. And it's that event, the rise of the sun after the long, long night, that would come to be known as the dawn of the world. And that is the reason why Joy Boy created and left behind the One Piece. But that is a story no one yet knows about. What are the ancient weapons? What are these three mysterious entities that were said to exist during the Void Century? Or rather, who are the ancient weapons? And most importantly of all, what is the purpose of said three ancient weapons? Well, my belief is that the weapons existed for a far bigger purpose than to simply wage war. My belief is that the three ancient weapons existed and were led by Joy Boy for one single purpose: to bring the dawn of the world. This was Joy Boy and his allies' ultimate objective: to bring the dawn of the world. To dawn in a new era where all could be free, where all the races of the world could be equal and stand side by side under the same sun. This concept of the dawn of the world, of changing the structure of the world, came to be known as the day the world would be turned upside down. Because it would not only turn the current corrupt system upside down, but quite literally the entire world. After all, if the world is steeped deep into the night, then turning it upside down brings the dawn. This is a term that was used by Whitebeard during his final words, claiming that when the One Piece would be found, the world would be turned upside down. The same term was also used between Toki and Oden, revealing to us that the reason why Toki leapt into the future was to see a day where the world would be turned upside down. Even Roger, when he first set out to sea and first met Rayleigh, exclaimed the same thing, that he wanted to turn the world upside down. This is why Peter named his pirate crew the Nox Pirates, the Latin word for night, because he wanted to be someone who paved the way for the dawn. Similarly, Kolski is the Japanese word for moonlight, because the Kolski clan would help one day pave the path for the dawn of the world. Just like Toki stated in her prophecy, "O you moon unaware of the dawn, if your wish is to come true, then cast 9 shadows on the moonlit night, woven of 20 years, and you shall know the brilliance of the dawn." Someone like Orochi had interpreted this chant to be aimed at him, but it is revealed in the flashback that the one Toki was addressing is implied to be Oden himself, since she talks to him as she chants her final words. Oden represents the moon unaware of the dawn because he could not achieve it himself. But as long as he cast his own light on 9 shadows, his 9 red scabbards, those 9 individuals could open a path to the dawn in his place. And it's fitting that the opening of Wano would serve as one of the first steps to lead to the dawn of the world, because Wano is based on Japan, the land of the rising sun, the land of the dawn, something that we are told again and again. And the hints don't stop there. Why do you think it is that the ship of the Straw Hat Pirates is called the Thousand Sunny, with the shining sun as its figurehead? Why do you think that their captain and many other influential figures, including the previous Pirate King himself, were all born in the East, the place where the sun rises, on an island called Dawn Island? And of course, there's also all the foreshadowing set up with the symbols of the sun, or the themes of the sun we've seen across Fishman Island and so many arcs in the rest of the series. Pedro might have been the first to properly explain this concept, but it's always been there. It's always been foreshadowed and set up across the entire series, ever since the very start. Even the iconic sound effect, Dawn that Oda loves to put in so many pages could be considered foreshadowing of this, because it's the same reading as Dawn. And in fact, one of the biggest forms of foreshadowing, believe it or not, is in the form of anime openings. Yes, the actual anime openings. Because these have held the biggest spoilers in the Star series by foreshadowing certain events in their lyrics, something that almost no one ever noticed. After all, when it comes to making songs for anime openings for any series, the anime and manga staff often give directives and words and concepts that should be mentioned in the lyrics, and through that, Oda managed to sneakily hide many references to future events in the series by just asking the singers to feature specific words. Specifically, the word dawn, and any mentions of the night before it, the sun, its light, and the tomorrow to come. For example, opening 1 mentions "send that annoying night flying away." In opening 2, they say, "The back of this dream I chase is unlike that of any other. I chase and chase after it with a burning feeling that awakens the dawn. We aim for the shining light. That shine of ours is a sun that will never set. With the sun always in our hearts, and with the power to connect together, I must keep running so I can grab hold of tomorrow. The clouds float in the cobalt blue, soaked in the road to the tomorrow that was lost. But all you need to do is laugh before the twilight. I believe, let's go to the one tomorrow. Before the dawn breaks the night, let's set off. Let's go pick up the tomorrow we haven't seen yet. The sun rises, illuminating all of our sorrows equally. I believe in it, the future that will unite us all in one piece. I can't stand still, I can't stop. The dawn hasn't come yet and I'm getting impatient. Let's raise the flag. The sun in our hearts will never set. I can't wait for the morning, it's too frustrating, so how about we take the sun ourselves and drag it up to the sky? When tough times come, just laugh. If you want to look for a new tomorrow, be more confident in yourself. As we gather all the treasures, let's give a big laugh. Use it all up in a crazy noisy party and spray it all out." Sure, some of these might be coincidences, but there's no way all of these are. There's no way that all of these mentions of dawn aren't intentional. And this is not accounting for all the times the dawn is visually depicted in the openings and endings directly. It's been there in front of our own eyes this whole time. It's the goal we've been chasing after this entire series, yet most readers have never realized this. Ever since the very start, the dawn has been our ultimate goal. But back to our story. While we've seen that many share Joy Boy's ideals of equality, not all felt the same way. Because those in power felt threatened. They realized just how dangerous Joy Boy had become, that the power and privilege they held could be ripped right away from their hands. They'd be dragged down from their perches and lose the monopoly they so desperately craved. Even in the present, we can very visibly see the effects this has left. The descendants of those who once opposed Joy Boy long in the past share those same ideals of monopoly and control, ruling the world from high above, seeing themselves as gods above all other humans and races. Their discrimination towards other races and even other humans who they view as different species, since they see themselves as gods, is arguably worse than any other individual has shown in the series. The story has been written to show just how despicable they are. These individuals are the descendants of the kings of the human countries that possessed the most power back in Joy Boy's day. While not ruling together, they were the ones in power, those who stood at the top of the world and saw themselves as gods. One of these families, the Don Quixote clan, was said by the Tontata to be vicious, greedy and manipulative, embodying the ideal of corruption and control. And it is likely that all the other kings were no different. If Joy Boy had managed to bring the dawn of the world, then that would jeopardize their power. As Clover put it, what they feared was not the Great Kingdom's power, but their ideals. And with how deep that corruption ran, those in power were willing to do anything to put a stop to Joy Boy's dream, which could have robbed them of their privilege. They were so scared by the prospect of the dawn of the world happening that they wanted to ensure Joy Boy would never be able to carry it out. So to achieve that, 20 kings from 20 kingdoms across the world formed an alliance. And thus, the 20 kingdoms, the alliance, declared war on Joy Boy. As it had been the case before, while humans were biologically weaker to a lot of other races, they always retained one advantage: numbers. Their military power proved to be a mighty force, and thus Joy Boy and his allies had no other choice but to fight to survive. Thus started the Great War. This Great War became a conflict on a global scale. On one hand, there was the faction of the Great Kingdom, the kingdom of pirates led by Joy Boy, alongside their many allies formed by many of the world's oppressed races. And on the other hand was the allied powers of 20 human kingdoms, wishing to eradicate his ideals. However, to understand the event of this great war, we need to understand what were the biggest players of this conflict: the three ancient weapons. We haven't talked much about them yet, but the three ancient weapons are one of the most important aspects of the Void Century. But to understand what role the weapons played in the story at large, we need to understand what the three ancient weapons are, which is far from easy. So for starters, let us recap what we know for a fact. The so-called ancient weapons are three, known by the names of Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus. These names are a reference to real-life Greek mythology representing the great trinity of gods. Pluton was the god of the underworld, and as such represented the earth. Poseidon was the god of the seas, and as such represented the sea. And Uranus was the god of the heavens, thus representing the skies. Earth, sea, and sky, below, middle, and above, a trinity that symbolized the three planes. This mythological reference was acknowledged in World in the fact that Crocodile mentioned Pluton was said to have been named after a god, just like in Greek mythology, and later Robin confirmed that all three weapons were named after gods. Pluton is the first of the three weapons to be named, first mentioned by Crocodile in Alabasta. He mentioned having heard of this lead that a weapon was located on the island and that a poneglyph on said island would detail its location. He also claimed that it's a weapon capable of destroying an entire island with one blast. However, while Robin does find out about it, we are not told any more details within that arc. It's only later in Water 7 when Iceberg revealed that the ancient weapon Pluton is actually a battleship that was crafted in Water 7 long ago. The designer of the ship passed down its blueprints across the generations in secret, under the fear that someone could misuse this weapon, or the other two weapons, for evil, making it so that these blueprints could be allowed to create a counter-weapon that should be built if any of the original weapons went on a rampage if someone with evil intentions took hold of them. Though these blueprints were only left behind in case that ever came to happen and were to be destroyed if their existence ever came to light. Iceberg wanted to burn them, but Robin's existence posed the threat that the weapons would be able to be reborn, so he held off from doing so. However, Frankie, deciding to believe in the Straw Hats being able to protect Robin and not misuse the weapons, something that would come to pass, decided to burn the blueprints, forcing the world to rely on the already existing weapons. However, it's strongly implied that the original Pluton is still around, and the most confusing thing is that, like Crocodile said, it's supposed to be in Alabasta. Admittedly, maybe his lead was wrong and only the poneglyph was there, but even Robin referred to Pluton as the Pluton of Alabasta, and this is with knowledge of its location. And this would make a lot of sense because, well, yes, Alabasta was one of the 20 kingdoms that formed the Allied Powers, which later became the world government. At the same time, Alabasta also seems to have opposed the Allied Powers at some point. Not only did they refuse, or perhaps were not allowed, to join the other 19 kings and Marijois, but they also hid a poneglyph in their country. But most importantly, they also bear the symbol of the sun in their flag, the symbol of Joy Boy's allies. This indicates that one of two things happened. Either one, at first they were Joy Boy's allies, but ended up betraying him and siding with the other 19 kingdoms, taking the poneglyph not to guard it, but to hide it from the world. This would explain why Robin laughed at the prospect of Cobra saying they were protecting that poneglyph. Or, on the other hand, maybe they were originally part of the 20 kingdoms and fought as part of the Allied Powers, but by the end of the war they came to realize their mistakes and regretted their choices, which is why they refused to ascend to Marijois, because they did not want to become as corrupt as the other celestial dragons, offering to protect one of the poneglyphs as repentance for their actions. It's hard to determine which of the two was what actually happened, but at the very least it is very evident that the Kingdom of Alabasta was affiliated both with the Allied Powers and with the Great Kingdom at one point or another, so this kingdom having ties with Pluton directly is not that far-fetched. Regardless, for now let's focus on the other weapons we know about. Poseidon. It has been confirmed that Poseidon is the name given to a mermaid princess who inherits the power to lead the colossal creatures known as the Sea Kings. An ancient legend of the Ryugu Kingdom's royal family says that every several hundred years, Poseidon manifests itself in the form of a mermaid princess. It is unclear how this power transmits down, but the Sea Kings refer to it being the form of their king, the king of all Sea Kings. This indicates that this isn't so much a magical power that allows the Mermaid Princess to control Sea Kings like puppets, but rather that the Mermaid Princess inherits or embodies the spirit of Poseidon, the god of the Sea Kings, and as such, the Sea Kings follow the orders of their ruler. Like they told Shirahoshi, to them she was always their king, because the Sea Kings follow Poseidon, their ruler. If Pluton was said to be named after a god, then it perhaps is possible that Poseidon was also named after a god, quite literally. This king of the Sea Kings could perhaps be their god, not necessarily an almighty creature, but at least the one that they view as their ruler, the one they follow. So in that regard, Poseidon could be the mortal form of this god. It isn't clear exactly how this works and what this type of god really is, and sadly, we simply lack enough information to really determine what this god is, how this power came to be, so we will not be answering that in this project. But at the very least, that doesn't really matter to us, because we know that this power exists, and that is what is important. But what if this is applied to all three weapons? Like Robin said, all three weapons were named after gods, something even Crocodile confirmed for the Pluton of Alabasta. So what I am thinking is, what if these three weapons were all the same thing? What if they all three were actually people? The term reborn has always been used in regards to the three weapons. It was said that Robin could help these weapons be reborn through her knowledge. What if this is not meant symbolically, but literally? Just like how Poseidon was reborn in the form of Shirahoshi, what if all three weapons have been reborn? What if these three weapons are simply the incarnate forms of three godlike deities that some races follow: Pluton, Poseidon, and Uranus? Because we've already seen someone who is identical to Poseidon, someone that, just like Shirahoshi, has been able to command a colossal creature that acknowledges them as their master.
Stop!
We've seen very clearly how Momonosuke ordered Zunisha around. Just like the Sea Kings, Zunisha is a colossal creature that, despite its animalistic appearance, possesses the intelligence and language of people. Zunisha even has the kanji reading for Elfin Lord, which is quite similarly written to the kanji for Sea King, further showing how similar these creatures are. Yet what is most telling is the form in which both Shirahoshi and Momonosuke were able to talk to these creatures, being through the voice of all things, something that was confirmed in the Vivre databook. This ability has been mentioned a few times across the series, a mysterious ability that certain individuals have, which according to the databook is implied to potentially be an advanced form of observation haki. Something that allows to listen to the voices of the poneglyphs and certain creatures such as the Sea Kings or Zunisha. Though the only ones who are acknowledged by these creatures are Shirahoshi and Momonosuke, since they are the only two these species will acknowledge as their leaders, as their kings. Since Shirahoshi is acknowledged to be Poseidon, the leader of the Sea Kings, then what difference is there with Momonosuke? What if Momonosuke is the incarnation of Uranus? This is something that is further motivated by the fact that Zunisha is a colossal creature that goes high into the sky, deep into the clouds. The Vivre databook even mentioned how Zunisha reaches as high as the Sky Islands, with one of its favorite foods being apples from said Sky Islands. In that regard, it perfectly embodies that symbol of the sky, because it is a threat that descends from the heavens onto the seas below. It does, however, seem odd that Momonosuke can only lead one elephant, while Shirahoshi can lead potentially hundreds of Sea Kings. But what if there once were more of them? What if there used to be many elephant lords like Zunisha, but most of them ended up disappearing? Could that perhaps have to do with the crime that Zunisha committed? Zunisha once committed a grave crime, perhaps a mistake that resulted in the extinction of a lot of members of its species, and so Uranus condemned it to walk and protect the road poneglyph on its back as repentance. Furthermore, what if Uranus allowed the Minks to live on the back of Zenisha, giving them a home where they could stay away from humans, which is why in turn the Minks vote to form a pact of brotherhood with the Kosuke clan and offer to come to their aid if they ever needed it. There is another specimen of Zenisha species that we could have potentially seen though, and that is the entity of the Florian Triangle. This is a colossal creature similar in height to Zenisha. We only saw 3 large pillar-like shapes and a face, but these 3 pillars could be the 3 legs of an elephant, the 4th one out of sight. And the face does have the shape of 2 tusks coming out of the front, meaning it could be an elephant. Plus, Zenisha is said to always be covered in mist, as is this colossal creature in the Florian Triangle. This creature is considered to be responsible for sinking many ships. So what if, perhaps, it is still following its duty that Uranus gave it long ago to face off against any enemy ships that arrived? Thinking that way, it starts to make a lot of sense, but unfortunately this whole theory simply doesn't add up much because, as we mentioned, Pluton is a battleship. Iceberg made it very clear, and assuming it is the same Pluton Crocodile talked about, which makes sense since he did describe it that it could destroy an entire island with a single blast, then that rules out the idea that all 3 weapons were people. I did present the idea that maybe someone like Nefertari Vivi could be Pluton, as I mentioned in my fan manga Return to the Reverie, but that would only be if Iceberg was wrong and the blue pins were only meant as a counterweapon, not the original weapon. And as his and Crocodile's dialogue seems to suggest, the original Pluton seems like it was indeed a battleship. But it's still possible that Poseidon and Uranus were people and were the 2 original weapons, but Pluton simply was a ship. Or who knows, maybe Momonosuke does possess the exact same power that Shirahoshi has, but he simply isn't considered and labeled a weapon because he can only control 1 creature. Maybe Uranus is something else entirely that we simply don't have enough information to know about yet. Hell, who knows, maybe something like Whitebeard's Gura Gura no Mi is an ancient weapon because it was said that it can destroy the world, an attribute that has been given to all the other weapons, which might be why Blackbeard got his hands on it. Or maybe not. Honestly, there are so many options that we can't say for sure what all the ancient weapons are. But that doesn't matter, because in the end it doesn't matter what the 3 weapons are. It doesn't matter if Pluton is Vivi or is a ship. It doesn't matter if Uranus is Momo or something else. To our grander theory, it doesn't matter where the weapons came from. Like I said, we don't even know why Shirahoshi incarnated as Poseidon, but what matters to us is why the weapons exist, and more specifically, what their purpose is. Because it's that thing we just mentioned that is the key to understanding the role of the weapons. It's as Iceberg himself put it, the weapons will only serve 1 role: to bring the destruction of the world. This is the same thing that Roshinante mentioned to Law when speaking about the D clan, claiming that the ultimate objective of the D is to bring the destruction of the world. However, Roshinante explained that this destruction for the people of the D holds a very different meaning to that of havoc and eradication. And we've been told this time and time again that in the wrong hands, the weapons could destroy the world and sink it into darkness. It's the reason why Roshinante wanted to keep Law away from the Flamingo. If someone like him, or someone like Spandam, someone like Kaido and Big Mom, or someone like Blackbeard got their hands on the weapons, it could, quite literally, sink the world into darkness. But at the same time, if used in the right hands, then the weapons could be used for love, to bring a good change in the world. And Otohime mentioned that according to legend, one day a man, implicitly Joy Boy, would appear and guide Shirahoshi to using her power the right way. So while there are those that could use the weapons for evil and bring legitimate destruction to the world, there is also someone, a new Joy Boy, who could help destroy the world in a different way, a destruction that would lead to a brighter tomorrow. As a wise man once said, geography is everything, and it couldn't be more right. Dividing and segregating the world, separating it into many different pieces, keeping people divided, it makes it easier to keep them under control. For people to truly be free, Joy Boy would have to bring down these barriers and connect the world together in one piece. And so the ancient weapons exist exactly for that purpose: to destroy the Red Line and the Grand Line, to bring the destruction of the world. The Red Line and the Grand Line stand as the greatest obstacles to Joy Boy's dream, quite literally, and it's taking them down that is necessary to achieve this dream. We don't know how the Red Line and the Grand Line came to be, but I don't think that their creation is a natural phenomenon. After all, a ring of land thousands of meters in height that perfectly surrounds the entire world in half? A current in the form of a straight line perfectly perpendicular and with two bells on the sides where there are no currents? They're both too specifically built to be natural. Even Nami explained that the Red Line is in fact not a real continent but a series of different islands, all with different weather types fused together. And Oda mentioned in the SBS that Pangaea Castle's name might hold some importance in symbolic meaning to a grander mystery, given how it's named after the real-life Pangaea supercontinent, which was formed by different islands all coming and fusing together, just like the Red Line. But what if these two structures were not built by nature, but by someone? And in particular, when it comes to the Grand Line, we might even be able to tell who it was that created it. Poseidon. Because what is the main habitat in the whole wide world where the Sea Kings live in? On one hand, Fishman Island, and on the other, the Calm Belts. The Sea Kings guard the Grand Line from anyone who tries to enter it, sinking any ships that try to pass through. This is the exact same thing as Fishman Island, where many Sea Kings surround the area, making the journey to or from the island very dangerous. And yet, the island itself is never attacked. As Neptune pointed out, the Sea Kings would never attack the island because that's what they've been ordered to do. What if the Sea Kings stayed vigilant at the Calm Belts and Fishman Island as an order given by Poseidon? After all, many of the kingdom's allies, the Alabasta Kingdom, the Shandians, the Kuja, the Giants, the Dwarves, and of course the Fishmen themselves, not to mention the island where the Great Kingdom itself was located at the end of this ocean, are all located across the Grand Line. What if this was created as a natural barricade, with Poseidon asking the Sea Kings to protect all these islands, something that remained afterwards across the centuries by mistake? The Sea Kings might have been able to alter ocean currents, leading to the formation of the Calm Belts, and by result, the Grand Line, which would make it harder for any opponents to make it to them. And perhaps the Red Line might have been quite similar. Since Pluton is the god of the Earth, did the original Pluton have something to do with it? Did the original Pluton create the Red Line, much like Poseidon made the Grand Line? Or maybe not, if Pluton is a ship. Maybe the Red Line was created by like a devil fruit user or something else, or perhaps some other power, but how they came to be doesn't matter. Because like we said, what matters to us isn't the origin of the Red Line and the Grand Line, but their destruction. So many people tried to achieve this. We know the Giants tried to destroy the Red Line but weren't able to, citing it as the one thing they cannot destroy. And of course, we saw Laboon bashing his head for years in an attempt to destroy it too. Sure, this was fueled by a personal reason, but perhaps it shows an innate desire to destroy the Red Line by the whales, something that is supported by the fact that other members of his species also bear the same scars on their heads, indicating that they too attempted to destroy the Red Line through their headbutts. And as the Sea Kings put it, on the day that Joy Boy and Poseidon will meet again, the whales will rejoice, because the Red Line will finally be destroyed. Because if Shirahoshi can control the Sea Kings, then she can have them destroy the Grand Line, by undoing the currents, undoing the Calm Belts, and thus undoing the currents of the Grand Line. And in turn, Pluton and or Uranus could help destroy the Red Line. Pluton was said to be able to destroy an island with one cannon blast, so what if a barrage of cannon fire can destroy each and every single one of the islands that form the Red Line? Or perhaps Zunisha, with its colossal size, can actually destroy the Red Line and help bring it down. Or maybe it will be the Gura Gura Nami like we talked about before. It doesn't matter in which way it is and what each weapon is, in one way or another, the ancient weapons will help bring forth the destruction of the world, the destruction of the Grand Line and the Red Line. And that is something that will result in the destruction of Fishman Island. If the Red Line is destroyed, that would destroy Fishman Island, which lies below it. just like Charlie mentioned in her prophecy, that a man bearing a straw hat would help bring the destruction of Fishman Island. But this, unlike Charlie perceived it, would not be because of evil intent, but for the sake of helping destroy these barriers. And in the end, it won't matter because Fishman Island will not be needed anymore. The fishmen will emigrate to the surface under the same sun as humans, which is why the Noah Ark was created, a ship that can only be carried by one of the ancient weapons, Poseidon. And that explains so much. It's why it's been emphasized why the weapons are so important. It's why Otohime said that Shirahoshi could one day change the world, and why she had to be protected until then. It's why Yamato said that Momonosuke had to survive at all costs. Roger said he was too early because Shirahoshi hadn't been born yet, meaning he could not yet bring the destruction of the world himself. And the Sea Kings were waiting for the day that Joy Boy and the Mermaid Princess, their two kings, would meet again. Because without Poseidon, the Grand Line cannot be undone, and without her, the people of Fishman Island cannot emigrate, meaning that Grand Line cannot be destroyed as well. But Joy Boy was not able to do this, just like Roger, because potentially Poseidon died during the original war. That is why Joy Boy wrote an apology letter in her name for the people of Fishman Island, apologizing for failing to protect her and thus not being able to bring his objective to help them emigrate to fruition. And more importantly than anything, this would help explain why this 800-year gap was necessary, because Poseidon needed to be reborn. Poseidon is said to be born every several hundred years, but this term is the exact same term used to describe the distance between the void century and the present. So what if Poseidon is only born every 800 years? Which is why Joy Boy and his people had to wait for so long, for 8 centuries, before they could bring forth the destruction of the world. Much like how the people of Wano had to wait 20 years until someone could come and free that country too. The other two weapons could potentially be the same, especially if they turn out to be humans, but even if they aren't, it doesn't matter, because Poseidon alone had to be born for both the destruction of the Grand Line and the destruction of the Red Line to happen, so regardless, that 800-year gap was necessary. So Joy Boy and his people waited. The people of the D waited across the centuries, generation after generation, until one day they could help bring the destruction of the world. Waiting until the weapons could be reborn, and thus help bring down the Grand Line and the Red Line. With Poseidon back, she could destroy the Grand Line and she could carry the Noah, allowing the Red Line to be destroyed too by either Pluton, Uranus, or both. And it's when these two are finally destroyed that finally, from that destruction, a world can be born anew. A world that is truly unified under the same sun, just like Otohime put it, finally ushering in the dawn of the world. By turning the world upside down, quite literally, and putting an end to this long, long night, by letting the dawn rise again, with the sun uniting all species together. The destruction of both the Grand Line and the Red Line will finally lead to a truly unified world. And that isn't just symbolically, but literally. In a world without boundaries, all seas will fuse together as one. Just like Odin said, the seas will split, because this will finally bring all the seas together. The East Blue, the West Blue, the North Blue, and the South Blue, all would fuse together to create...
お前さ、オールブルーって知ってるか？
にゃ。
なんだ知らねえのかよ。奇跡の海の話さ。その海にはよ、イーストブルー、ウエストブルー、ノースブルー、サウスブルー、この4つの海にいる全種類の魚が住んでるんだ。
The Old Blue likely did exist in the past at some point. The legend must have come from somewhere. But ever since those barriers were created, the Old Blue disappeared and became nothing more than a legend. Something most believed to just be a false myth. A world where there are no boundaries or limitations. One not divided by barriers, but unified as one. A world where everyone can be free. One where everyone could be free, both free from discrimination and with the freedom to adventure anywhere they want. And I think that at its core is the true meaning of the dawn of the world. Because the dawn on one hand represents the union of all races, The day when the sun rises and they can all live under the same sun, without prejudice or discrimination, where everyone is united and connected together in one piece. But at the same time, the dawn of the world represents the point in time when the red line and the grand line are physically destroyed, physically unifying and connecting the world into the all blue, into one piece, because that encapsulates the core meaning of freedom, to be able to sail anywhere in the world. In other words, to give everyone the right of adventure. And that is exactly what Joy Boy, what the D-Clan sought after for so long. Their ultimate objective, the destruction of the world, turning the world upside down, to bring the world to its dawn. Or, as it is known by its true name, the dawn of adventure. The Roman's dawn. But destroying the world and bringing the dawn would not be enough to fully connect all those who had been divided for centuries. The world itself is not the treasure Joy Boy left behind. After the world will be destroyed, someone will need to connect all its people together. So in order that someone could one day achieve that, Joy Boy left behind a special gift. Something that this person could use one day to connect the world together under the same sun. The One Piece. But that is a story no one yet knows about. Does fate exist in One Piece? This might seem like an odd question at first, but fate might in fact be one of the most important elements in the mysteries of the story, and as such, it is vital that we understand just how exactly fate works. However, before that, let's summarize everything so far. So, before the Void Century, the world was oppressed, with humans persecuting other races and oppressing each other, with rulers, kings, and tyrants attaining all the privilege, living as gods, while those below them suffered. Enter Joy Boy, a young man who set out to sea to become a pirate. Joy Boy valued freedom above all else. He wanted to be the freest man in the world, but he knew that he could only achieve that by bringing freedom to everyone else. Something that would only happen if he did away with the corrupt system of power and the discrimination that lied in the world. And so, he rallied the races of the world to fight for equality, founded a kingdom of pirates on the final island, and worked towards creating a tomorrow where all races could live under the same sun, the dawn. But to do this, the Grand Line and the Red Line would have to be destroyed, so that all the oceans could be connected into the All Blue, and so that everyone could travel the seas freely as they wish, ushering a new tomorrow where everybody could be free and seek out adventure, the dawn of adventure, the Roman's dawn. However, the only way to destroy the Red Line and the Grand Line would be through the power of the ancient weapons. But during the war, the weapons were likely wiped out, and so the Alliance gained the advantage and Joy Boy's forces were slowly dwindled and wiped out. However, before they had been defeated, Joy Boy had already realized that they were done for. As Clover described, the Grey Kingdom realized they would be wiped out, and in that regard, Joy Boy understood that he could not bring the dawn himself, so he made preparations to ensure that someone would one day be able to carry it out. And so, the war came to an end. The Alliance was triumphant, and all of Joy Boy's allies had to seek refuge in places where they could survive, protecting the stones that they were gifted. The 20 kings came together and founded the World Government, an organization that would keep control of the world under an even tighter grip, doubling down on their oppression and becoming actual gods. They began a great act of censorship, killing many historians and witnesses, and destroying any records that remained of those times, wiping away an entire century's worth of information, also that Joy Boy's ideals would be forgotten. But Joy Boy and his allies had foreseen this, which is why they created the poneglyphs, so that someone one day could understand their dreams and carry them out. And furthermore, Joy Boy himself left something behind in order to ensure that those ideals would never disappear. The world government eradicated all traces of Joy Boy and his people. The island of the Great Kingdom was removed from all maps, and Joy Boy himself was likely executed. But, personally, I'd be willing to bet that even at the time of his execution, Joy Boy laughed. Because Joy Boy knew that he would not die. What if Joy Boy knew that the dawn would happen, and that he would one day reappear, not because he had confidence it would happen, but because it was already set in stone by fate? What if nothing in this world is a coincidence?
この世には偶然などないのかもしれない。すべてが必然であるかのように。
This is undeniably a very hard topic to tackle, because I personally hate the concept of fate in narrative. The concept of the chosen one guided and supported by fate has personally always felt like a cheap narrative choice to me, especially in the realm of shonen where hard work and determination are always part of the core themes. Given how, just like in real life, you can't count on fate and luck to carry you and do everything for you, you need to put in the effort yourself. However, on the other hand, I simply cannot deny the fact that fate is a thing in the world of One Piece. We don't know if it's an actual force or a power by fact, but we do at least know that several characters strongly believe in it. And furthermore, there have been several elements in the story that might also lend credence to the fact that fate is a real power. Thus, I am left in quite a precarious situation, because on one hand, I believe in Oda as a writer, and I don't think he'll screw up so fundamentally by making Luffy the chosen one, but at the same time, as an analyst, I cannot reject the evidence, and as such, I have to tackle this subject. So I hope you can approach it with the same level of maturity and look at the evidence rather than just jump into the idea that Oda would never do this. I hope you can stick with me to the very end before you jump to any conclusions, because only then you might understand the full picture and really get what Oda is going for here. Because while this might seem like just a cheap narrative choice at first, personally, I think this might actually be a stroke of genius. Fate, destiny, and luck are all concepts that have been present in One Piece. These three words, while they do possess mildly different meanings in English, they are all basically synonyms in Japanese. The kanji for fate literally reads as lucky soul, and it plays into the idea that luck and coincidences are ordained by a bigger force of order. While it does share deep roots with Shintoism, this belief isn't necessarily rooted in religion, and is widely spread across Japanese culture. It's one of the reasons why fortune readings and gambling are still massively popular in Japan compared to other countries, because people often want to test their fate, as well as why it is often written in as a narrative element in many manga, because it is a fundamental aspect of the culture, potentially even bigger than it is in a lot of Western countries. When it comes to One Piece, however, fate is a concept that is specifically tied to a certain element, the D clan. When Law asked Sengoku about his initial in Dressrosa, Sengoku thought the D are always following a checkered fate, and later in Onigashima, Law mused in front of a poneglyph, "I want to know about the meaning of this checkered fate." And even Yamato mentioned this after reading Oden's logbook. In many instances, Robin has realized that the D are strongly tied to the Void Century and to the mysteries of history, which is likely why the D clan itself is likely related to Joy Boy's people. But perhaps the biggest pieces of information we've gotten about the D come from Don Quixote Rocinante. Rocinante referred to the D as the Fateful Race, those guided by fate, and he also claimed that in a certain land the D are referred to as the natural enemies of the gods. Since the celestial dragons are viewed as gods, they fear that the D stand as their natural enemy, and so in Marijois, little celestial dragons are told that if they don't behave, a D will gobble them up, treating the D like a boogeyman of sorts. According to Rocinante, this is because the D have a philosophy that pits them against the gods, which makes sense because this is the same thing that Clover mentioned. Joy Boy and his people had an ideal that were against the idea of a select few ruling from the top as gods. It is possible that monarchs and tyrants of the Void Century view themselves as gods, much like the celestial dragons of today. We saw this with King Don Quixote, with how the Tontata described him. And so, in that regard, Joy Boy's ideals of equality is one that made him the natural enemy of the gods, as we've previously established, because in a world where everyone is equal, then there are no gods. Or what if, perhaps, some sort of entity described as a god who manipulated fate really did exist in the Void Century, and the D-Clan stood against it by manipulating fate themselves? Quite simply, do you believe in a higher power? Well, perhaps it's too early to think about that. Rocinante furthermore felt that the goal of the D-Clan was the destruction of the world, but even he indicated that such a term comes with a very different meaning of that of actual destruction and havoc. By destruction of the world, like we've established last episode, Rocinante was likely referring to the concept of turning the world upside down, by bringing the destruction of the Red Line and the Grand Line, destroying the current political system and bringing forth a new world, that which would come to be known as the Romance Dawn. That is likely what the D stands for, the Dawn Clan. The Dawn, as Rocinante put it, is their ultimate objective, to destroy the current world and allow it to be reborn under a new dawn that will unite everyone under the same sun. The idea of the D standing for Dawn is certainly one of the most popular theories today, but I was already considering this when Pedro first properly introduced the concept back in 2016, when I was already researching for this project, because even back then, it already made a lot of sense. After all, there is a certain element that people almost never consider when it comes to finding out what the D stands for, and it's the fact that One Piece is a Japanese manga, but the D is most likely an English word, much like things like One Piece or Laugh Tale, but as such it needs to be an English word that is easy to understand for Japanese audiences, or, even more likely, an English word that has already been written in English in the manga itself, such as Dawn. Dawn is written in English on the cover of the very first chapter, even in the Japanese release. Oda could have easily just written it in Japanese, but he specifically wanted to write it in English, and it's something that extends to the volume version as well. One of the very first things you see when you pick up the manga for the first time will be the writing Romance Dawn. And as such, it's a word that is ingrained in the mind of any reader, even someone who might have little understanding of English. So, much more than any other option, Dawn simply makes the most sense to be the D. And, of course, this also ties with everything we've talked about, with Rocinante claiming that the D's ideals oppose the ideals of the Celestial Dragons, the same thing Clover cited as the reason for the world government's censorship of Joy Boy and his people's existence, and even Yamato, with knowledge of the journal, mentioned the Dawn shortly before talking about the D initial too. Everything we've learned so far seems to indicate that the D clan, likely the descendants of Joy Boy's people, are all fundamentally tied with the central idea of the Dawn. The ideal that the world government fears so much that his descendants hid this initial in their names. And it's each of these individual D members that in one way or another have all helped create a path towards turning the world upside down, weaving fate to do so. The interesting pattern between all the individuals who bear the D in their name is that while they all have played some role or another towards leading the world to its dawn, at least most of them don't seem to have done so consciously. So many of them have contributed in different ways towards leading to this dawn of the world, whether it's Law setting a path to defeat the Yonko, or Soul rescuing the last person capable of reading the poneglyphs, or even the larger roles the likes of Ace have played in the story. Most of the D don't seem to be conscious about the fact that their actions are helping pave a path towards the dawn. So, if they are not creating this path to the dawn consciously, could this not be considered fate? And in the end, there is someone who has influenced this path towards the dawn more than anyone else. Of course, Monkey D. Luffy. This man is the central figure of everything, both as the main character of the story and the man who will one day follow in Joy Boy's footsteps. But that begs the question, then was Luffy's dream something he achieved out of his own strength? Or was he simply fated to be? Or just like Whoopslat put it all the way back in chapter 96, is it his dream or his fate? And perhaps no better example could serve to explain this than a scene that happens later in that same arc. Placed upon an execution stand, the very same Roger was executed on, Luffy is about to be beheaded when, out of nowhere, a lightning bolt strikes the plaza. In the perfect spot, at the perfect time, all in order to save Luffy's life. The chances for such a meteorological phenomenon to happen at such a perfect time are astronomically impossible. To be hit by a thunderbolt is rare, but to be hit at a point right before dying to be saved, it's too rare to really be just a coincidence. So was this really the work of coincidence, or that of fate? After seeing this, even Sanji pondered the existence of a god, and Smoker wondered if this is all just a coincidence, or if the heavens were trying to let Luffy live. Even Rayleigh eventually said the same thing. He wondered if there really was such a thing as a coincidence, thinking back to when Roger first met him donning that same straw hat. And there's a scene later in episode 969 of the anime that calls back to this and points out how odd this is. Roger, in his first meeting with Rayleigh, said that their meeting had to be fate. At that point, he even stated that he wanted to turn the world upside down, just like Joy Boy wanted to. But perhaps most striking of all is the fact that Roger was wearing a straw hat, a hat that Luffy would one day also wear. And this is particularly important because the implied national treasure of Marijois is exactly just that, a giant straw hat. What this straw hat really means is hard to say. If you personally ask me, I think it's as simple as this being Joy Boy's straw hat, a symbol of freedom, but the point I'm getting at is that even before his journey even began, Luffy was gifted a hat that not only pertained to the former Pirate King, but was potentially the same type of hat that Joy Boy once wore too, or at least a hat that is closely tied with the Void Century. And in that regard, both Roger and Luffy wearing this hat, can it really be called a coincidence? Even King Emu looked at the hat compared to Luffy's wanted poster and pondered to himself, could he be the one? Something like this hat already implies that Luffy isn't just a normal person, and of course this is not accounting that Luffy was born a member of the D clan. The D isn't an honorary title or anything, we've seen it passed down in biological relationships, so from the very start Luffy was already born as someone special. Even the Sea Kings seemed to foresee the date around which Luffy and Shirahoshi would be born, though this could simply be a form of clairvoyance like the one Shirley had, since she also predicted Shirahoshi's birth, which I personally consider to just be a form of advanced future sight, so I don't think this necessarily indicates anything. But if we go back to that lightning scene, we start to realize that there are plenty of other scenes all across the series that are just like it. Points where Luffy should definitely have died, but he is saved at the very last moment. To put just a few examples, in Alabasta, when he is defeated by Crocodile and buried into the ground, it's Robin who saves him from death. Had she not been there at the right time, Luffy would have likely died. And at that point, Robin asked Luffy, "Those of you who carry the name D, why do you fight? Just who are you people?" At Enies lobby, right as the Straw Hats were about to die and with no way of escape, Mary came in to save them at just the right second. Had him pulled down, Luffy was fatally poisoned, yet he managed to be saved by the one of the very few men who could save him in such a situation. Even Ivankov mentioned that Luffy's chances would only go from 0% to 2-3%, something incredibly rare to happen. At Marineford, he was saved countless times from the nick of death by countless people, and even at the very end, where it seemed like he couldn't escape, Law came in to his rescue, a member of the D-Clan, and Kobe's speech and later Shanks' arrival are what gave him enough time to slip away, something that happened by mere seconds, and even Shanks himself remarked that, whether for the better or the worse, this moment now has greatly changed the fate of the world. At Dressrosa, there were several points where Luffy was about to die, yet he ended up being saved in the nick of time. On his way to Whole Cake Island, Luffy once again ended up being poisoned by a deadly toxin, one that was about to kill him. Yet coincidentally, one of the only people who could have saved his life, one of the very few people in the entire world who could remove the toxins from him that fast, just happened to be there. And it wasn't because they had an interest in meeting him, no. They specifically stated they wanted to meet Sanji, but they coincidentally happened to miss him and ended up meeting Luffy instead. And of course, Luffy meeting Law and Kinemon at Pang Hazard eventually led him to the path to defeat the Yonko, and in getting the Road Poneglyphs. Had he not met them on that island, would he have ever ended up at Wano? Especially since Ace before him also ended up making the same promise of defeating Kaido. Even CP0 later remarked how all of these seemed like an act of fate. Can all of these be called coincidences? Sure, some of them might be, but several others just can't be. This isn't just plot armor or narrative convenience, there's no such convenience as a lightning bolt falling in place at the right time, there's no such thing as being saved from the nick of death at the right instant, again and again and again and again. There are countless other examples I could make, but they always lead to Luffy surviving under unbelievable circumstances. And this isn't considering the luck Luffy has had in general, whether it's someone like Robin ending up on his crew, literally the last person alive capable of reading the poneglyphs, all thanks to the efforts of a member of the D-Clan saving her life, or whether it's Trafalgar Law, another member of the D-Clan setting Luffy on the right route to defeat the Yonko and attain all the road poneglyphs, or the many allies who have helped Luffy on his journey. I'm sorry, but no matter how you put it, it almost feels like none of this was achieved by Luffy's own efforts, but by all the help that others have given him. But then, does that mean that everything so far was meaningless? Was Luffy just born to become the Pirate King? Was he blessed with the D in his name from birth? Was he given his hat because Shanks knew he would be the chosen one? Is Luffy the reincarnation of Joy Boy, or simply the chosen one meant to carry out this prophecy? Well, before we answer all this, to better understand the situation, I would suggest we take a look at our individual who is so deeply tied with fate as much as Luffy. Blackbeard. From the time he was introduced, Blackbeard is someone who has shown to deeply believe in fate. He mentioned that how things develop is nothing more than an act of fate, and his crewmate Doc Q remarked that fate is what measures a man's worth at all moments. In fact, we saw Doc Q offering Luffy a basket of apples, some of which were rigged with explosives, but Luffy ended up eating a good apple. Doc Q remarked how Luffy is blessed by luck, indicating that he was testing Luffy's fate. Even later in Impel Down, on their way to level 6, Blackbeard and his men were caught in Magellan's deadly toxin and were about to die. Yet by pure chance, or perhaps fate, Shiryu arrived just in time, happening to carry an antidote with him. He remarked that if it hadn't been for this coincidence, Blackbeard's crew might have all died, but Augur mentioned that his appearance was an act of fate, with Teach exclaiming that those who fear are the losers, you should live in the moment, indicating that one should trust in their own fate and move forward with conviction. But no instance is potentially more telling than the clash between Ace and Blackbeard at Banaro Island. Blackbeard claimed that him killing Thatch was a twist of fate, one that led him to this point, allowing him to become darkness itself. And on the other hand, you have someone like Ace, who wielded the power of fire, which symbolizes the sun. Ace created a copy of the sun to fight Blackbeard, symbolizing the dawn itself, the rise of the sun. In this case, this was a lot more than just a clash between pirates. It was a clash between the flames of the sun, the flames of the dawn, and the darkness of the night. Blackbeard right then and there declared to Ace that he wanted to become the Pirate King, and to him that meant not bringing the dawn, but to conquer the world. Standing in stark contrast to both Ace and Luffy's ideal, these are two opposite ideals that were clashing against each other. The clash between Blackbeard and Ace would unavoidably determine the fate of how things would move forward in the future. The dusk or the dawn, which would prevail? If Ace won, then Blackbeard would be defeated, eradicating this big threat from the world. Blackbeard won, and, well, we already know what happened. But that's the thing, both outcomes were possible. As the battle unfolded, Augur remarked, "Today is yet another of fate's crossroads." To him, this was a crossroads of fate. These are two different fates clashing against each other, either of which could have won, and in the end, Blackbeard was the one who came out on top, sure, but there was every chance that Ace could have won himself. In other words, it means that fate is not set in stone. The D have shown that they have the power to guide fate, but how they guide it is up to them. They aren't destined to have things go their way, they make things go their way. Roshinante remarked the very same thing, claiming that Law had managed to escape his deadly fate and marked a new fate for himself. The reason why Roshinante didn't want Law to follow Doflamingo is because he was afraid that he would let Doflamingo rise to the position of Pirate King through his powers, someone who, much like Blackbeard, would have sent the world falling into darkness. The dawn of the world is far from guaranteed. There are those who have the ability to lead the world to its dawn, sure, but there are also those who can lead it to an even darker night. Some seek to free and others seek to conquer. These two opposite fates cannot coexist. One of them will have to prevail over the other, and it will be these crossroads of fate that will represent the final struggle of the series. But the one that will prevail in the end will not be the one blessed by the heavens, but the one whose will shall be strong enough to carve their own fate. None of Luffy's struggles so far have been the work of sheer luck or fate. This conflict will bring about a big war, potentially the biggest the world has ever seen, as Oden put it. This will result in a colossal storm, both figuratively and likely literally, a conflict that will engulf the world like an unstoppable storm. This is likely the storm that the D will bring again that the celestial dragons always fear, and the same storm that is mentioned across the series and can even be found present in many of the lyrics of many of the openings. This storm will result in the eventual eradication of the celestial dragon system, so regardless of if it will lead to a path of light or to a path of darkness, the celestial dragons will fall. And it's quite fitting that one of the central people trying to change the political system is a member of the D clan, with the ability to create actual storms. Something that's been set up since as early as East Blue. And it will be after this dark storm and a really difficult struggle that finally the sun will rise again. As long as we keep believing in Luffy, I'm certain he will be able to bring forth a new dawn. Sure, without this ability to manipulate fate, much like the other D, maybe Luffy would have never gotten to where he is, and that is important to acknowledge. But at the same time, he would have never gotten anywhere if it weren't for his determination or willingness to never give up. Had Luffy decided to give up at any point, fate wouldn't have carried him to becoming the Pirate King. His adventures would have ended there. Every battle, every struggle, every challenge was overcome from Luffy's own strength, from his determination to never give up. The reason why Luffy passed the true 3% chances of surviving Magellan's toxin wasn't just due to meeting Ivankov, but as Ivankov himself put it, from Luffy's own willpower to survive. It's something Luffy achieved on his own, and it's at that point that Ivankov remarked,
一度は死ぬと決まった運命に逆らうことがどれほどのことか。奇跡なめんじゃないよ!
Everything Luffy has achieved so far, every miracle that has blessed him, was not just the work of fate alone. It was the very fate that he himself carved, and the hard work that he put in order to carry it out. But that still doesn't answer exactly what this fate is. And that is something that is hard to answer definitively. Maybe it really is just a power that kind of exists, or perhaps it has a set origin. Maybe it's a manifestation of Haki, willpower so strong that it even weaves fate itself. Or maybe it really is just all superstition and just pure coincidence. But like many things we've explored, it's not so much about how it came to exist, but why it exists. What I'm essentially getting at is that regardless of what fate ends up being, regardless of what it is that pushes the D, it is not fate that controls them, but they are the ones who write fate itself. It is through their actions, their decisions, that they are able to create fate. As Blackbeard put it, fate is what measures a man's worth at all moments. When Sengoku talked about Roshinante's actions, despite claiming that he followed a checkered fate, he also told Law that Roshinante's actions were not driven by a larger purpose. He told Law not to try and attach a meaning to Roshinante's love, indicating that he simply helped Law because he loved him. Roshinante helped Law change his fate, but the source of these actions were nothing simpler than love. And similarly, someone like Saul, while he also ended up forging a path towards fate, he didn't betray the Marines because it was his destiny, but he did it because he felt it was the right thing. And it was his love for Robin that saved her life. Rouge saved her son's life not because it was important for the dawn of the world, but because it was her kid. Because she loved him. So on and so forth. The action of all these individuals were not driven by some ulterior motive, but simply by the conviction of their own personal ideals. They created their own fates. And there might be no better example to describe this than Luffy's encounter with Oracle, Mihawk, and Marineford. As Mihawk drew his blade, he stated, "Now, fate, Let us see how you favor the shining star of the next generation. Will his life end here, or will you save it from my black blade? Literally stating to test Luffy's fate. Despite attempting to seriously kill him, it's through the help of his allies that Luffy managed to get away and once again survive. And at that point, Mihawk realized, explaining just what exactly this power of fate really is.
その場にいる者たちを次々に自分の味方につける。
その調子だべれよ、麦わらボーイ。
切り抜けたようじゃな。
ルフィ、兄上をお助けするのじゃ。
この海においてあの男は最も恐るべき力を持っている。
Because that's quite simply what Luffy's power of fate is. It's not so much the ability to write destiny itself, but to connect with people, to draw in people who will help him go on the right path. Think back to all those times, such as when Luffy was struck by the lightning at Logtown. Was that simply fate saving him? Or was that the power of Monkey D. Dragon, who used his Delphoid powers to save Luffy from that execution? It was Robin who saved Luffy from the sand at Alabasta. Mary came in to save them at just the right second. It was Ivankov who helped Luffy survive at Impel Down. It was Scobie and Shanks who saved Luffy from Marineford and all the other allies who protected him. It was all the allies at Dressrosa who helped save Luffy. Everybody who came together so that Luffy could defeat Doflamingo. It was Reiju who saved Luffy from poison. It was Kinemon and Law who guided Luffy to Wano. All of these individuals have saved Luffy because Luffy has the ability to connect with people. He has the power to have others trusting him, to believe in him, and to help him out in turn. As Luffy said during Arlong Park, he knows he can't do everything alone, and like he told Bullet in Stampede, there is no point in chasing for the path to the top alone. Luffy's crewmates, his nakama, his allies, his friends, all the bonds he has created and connected with are the most important thing in the world to him. They are his most important treasure, more than even his own hat. Luffy needs others to help him out, and there's nothing wrong with that. Life isn't meant to be fought through power alone. That is what friends are for. The path to the pinnacle can't be achieved by one's own strength alone, but through the help of the bonds that one has forged. Above anything else, that is potentially one of the most fundamental themes of One Piece. Perhaps Oda will prove me wrong and I'm just being too faithful and hopeful in this writing, and I'm just being too optimistic. Ultimately, it doesn't really change anything in the grand scheme of things if Luffy was the chosen one or not, but for the sake of good writing, I think it makes so much more sense for Luffy to be truly free, even free from destiny itself. Luffy wasn't given his straw hat by Shanks because he knew he was the chosen one. Shanks chose to bet on him. Shanks saw in Luffy the same dream that Roger had, the dream to throw the biggest party in the world. And it was that which led him to place his bet on Luffy. It was Luffy's own ability to make Shanks trust in him that set him on the route towards his dream. And it's everyone else who has chosen to believe in him across that journey that have helped set Luffy on his path to one day finally become the Pirate King. And that is exactly as Rayleigh put it all along.
この世には偶然などないのかもしれない。すべてが必然であるかのように。縁はやおら形を成してゆく。とかく、ルフィはまた一段とあの帽子がよく似合う男になった。
But that is a story no one yet knows about. What is inherited will? No, really, what is inherited will? We all know it's a thing, we all know it's something that happens within the story of One Piece, but what is it, really? Is it a spiritual force that guides things? Is it just a symbolic personification or something? Is it a philosophical way of life or a power that manifests itself in the physical world? And you see, that's the tricky thing, because inherited will is something so mysterious, something still so undefined, that while we can sort of get an idea that it exists, we don't actually know what it even is. And inherited will is a massive part of this larger puzzle. After all, one could argue that the will of D is the will of the dawn, the will to make the dawn happen like we've talked about, so what exactly is inherited will all about? There's this misconception in the community that inherited will only applies to the D, but what only applies to them is the will of D. Everyone else can inherit different wills. But then, what exactly is inherited will? Well, by the end of this, not only will I explain what inherited will is, but also how I believe it's one of the most profound messages that Oda has conveyed in this manga. But to do that, I would suggest we look at a specific case that will allow us to properly understand how it works. The case I want to present is the life of Kozuki Oden. Oden was born in the Wano country, a country completely secluded from the rest of the world, and this clashed against his desire of freedom, wishing to see what lied beyond his walls. And eventually Oden would leave the country, traveling across the world and even making his way to the final island, witnessing the One Piece with his own eyes and coming to know everything in this world. And through this knowledge, he also understood what inherited will is. Because Oden had one clear objective: to open the borders of the Wano country. Since youth he hated the idea of being closed off, he yearned for freedom much like Joy Boy's people did, and wanted his country to be open so that any could access it. But furthermore, after his great journey, he realized that opening the borders of the country was also important for another reason. The entire reason why the Wano country closed its borders in the first place was to protect itself from the world government. After all, Wano hosts one of the 4 road poneglyphs, so they wanted to make sure that no one from the government would be able to get their hands on it. But 800 years into the future, Joy Boy would appear, as Oden put it, and thus Oden had to make sure that Joy Boy could actually get into the Wano country so that he could get access to the poneglyph. But what does that exactly mean? After all, later Oden stated that Joy Boy would travel 800 years into the future. But how exactly would he travel ahead in time like that? I mean, didn't we say last episode that fate isn't set in stone and that there is no such thing as reincarnation? So, how did he travel? Did he become a ghost? Did he travel in time? Well, we've already asked this question before, but we're going to answer it very, very soon. But for now, let's simply focus on the fact that Oden's dream was that of opening the borders of the Wano country. Unfortunately though, Oden was killed. He attempted to defeat Kaido, but was defeated, realizing it would likely be a future new generation that would defeat him in his place. One led by Joy Boy himself, realizing that Kaido is just another challenge in their long and arduous path to finding the One Piece. Which is why he told Toki that in the case he shouldn't succeed, that she should use her powers to send everyone 20 years into the future, the date the Sea Kings gave for when the new Joy Boy should be making their way into the new world. Oden failed to defeat Kaido and was boiled alive. He was valiant and resisted an entire hour inside the pot, which came to be known as the 1 Hour of Legends. But alas, despite surviving this entire hour, Oden's body was too weakened by the scorching oil, and knew that Orochi and Kaido would not let him get away. And so, pushing his vassals into the air and urging them to run towards the future, he left them with one very simple order: open the borders of the Wano country. Oden passed on his dream to his vassals and had confidence that they would inherit his will to make it come to pass in the future. His will, his dying wishes, was specifically this: to open the borders of the country. However, he added some final words after this. Even if I'm forgotten, I do not care. My soul will live on. Something important to understand from that first line is that the subject is not specified. Oden isn't saying who it is that will forget him, but the subject can be inferred to be one of two. Either one, he is referring to Kaido himself, saying that even if you were to forget me, I do not care, or alternatively, he could be referring to the larger public of Wano as a whole, saying that he doesn't care if the people of Wano were to forget him. Because what Oden is saying is that it doesn't matter if the likes of Kaido or even the people of Wano forget about him, because someone else will remember him. His vassals. Even if everybody else were to forget, his vassals would remember him and ensure that his objective comes to pass. And for as already impactful as this scene is, it's the dialogue that comes after that is particularly interesting, because the narrator says, "The curtain lowered on one legend, to be inherited by the leading players of the next stage." The word used here is exactly that, inherited, indicating that Odin's will would be inherited by the leading players of the next stage. And we already know who these leading players are, because in the scene right after, Toki was seen reading a letter from Odin that said, "In over 20 years, a great war that will likely split the oceans themselves will occur." This, of course, speaks of the final war, the storm that will occur at the end of the series, and in a struggle to bring the dawn, the splitting of the seas will occur. The splitting of the seas refers to the destruction of the Red Line and the Grand Line, the destruction of the world, splitting those seas apart. And then after that, Odin continued, "In other words, in another 20 years, the leading players of this great war will usher into the new world." Odin is indicating that these leading players are the new generation that will make its way into the new world, taking down Kaido and opening the borders of the Wano country. In that regard, Luffy, Zoro, Law, Kid, and Killer, and any others in this new generation leading the fight against Kaido, who are now standing at the pinnacle of the pirate world, are the ones that are going to help open the borders of the Wano country, and thus set up an essential step towards the dawn of Wano, which will lead into the dawn of the greater world. And it makes sense. Even Morgan's commented in Whole Cake Island that the one to find the One Piece would be a member of this worst generation, which includes all the Supernovas and Blackbeard. They are the ones who will change the world, for better or for worse. All across the series, we've heard this term of this new generation, the new generation that will change the world. But while these individuals are the ones that will bring this change, in part inheriting Odin's will as well, none of them could have made their way here if it weren't for Odin's vassals. The 9 Red Scabbards are the ones that brought Luffy and everyone else to the Wano country. Even someone like Kid would have never been able to fight against the Yonko as he is now if it weren't for the events they set in motion. So in that regard, what Odin said still stands, because the Scabbards remembered his objective. They were able to carry it out, and while they alone were not able to bring it to fruition, they were able to show the way to the dawn, to the new generation, so that they could inherit this dream as well. And this is exactly what Toki mentioned in her final words, asking Odin to shine his moonlight, his Kozuki in Japanese, onto 9 shadows, so that they inherit his will and pass it on to a new generation, so that Odin can know the brilliance of the dawn. In this poem, Toki was asking Odin to persist across these 20 years of night, so that his light could keep casting the shadows of the Scabbards. But this would indicate that Odin would have to persist across those 20 years to live after death. And admittedly, that's exactly what Toki said. Odin wondered why Toki wasn't saddened by his death, but Toki simply said, "You won't die, right?" And Odin laughed. Just like in his final moments, when Odin laughed as he fell into the pot. As a reminder, in Japanese, the verb to smile and the verb to laugh are written with the same word, so they're sort of considered the same concept, the same action. And we've seen this all across the entire series. Even as we talked about last episode, we saw Luffy smiling or laughing right before his death, just like Roger did back in the day. So many other characters, both members of the D-Clan and non-members alike, have smiled right before their death. But why do people smile or laugh when they die? As Smoker pointed out, most people would be scared when they are dying, but all of these people smile. And most importantly, what did Toki mean that Odin wouldn't die? Well, this is something we've heard before when Roger said the same thing to Rayleigh. As Rayleigh told us back at Sabaody, Roger's final words were simply,
"俺は死なねえぜ、相棒."
And similarly to Odin, Roger did not die. He lived even beyond death. So in that regard, it's likely the same thing that Odin meant about Joy Boy, that Joy Boy lived beyond death and traveled across 800 years. But what does that mean? Does it mean that they all became ghosts and survived even beyond death? Or does it mean something else? How can someone live after death? What does it mean to not die? Well, that question is hard to answer like that. So instead, how about we flip the question around? Instead of asking when it is that someone doesn't die, when is it that someone dies? Is it when they're shot through the heart? Wrong. Is it when they're ravaged by an incurable disease? Wrong. Is it when they've been poisoned by a deadly mushroom? Wrong. People die when they're forgotten. The answer has been there under our eyes this entire time. When is it that someone dies? When they're forgotten. And when is it that someone doesn't die? When they're remembered. That's all it really means. What Odin meant by the fact that he would not die is that people would remember him. The Scabbers would remember him and make sure to inherit his dream. As long as they remembered his dream, Odin would live, beyond death, beyond time, as long as people were there to inherit it. Even if everyone else were to forget about him, his dream would live on, and someone would one day make it come to pass. And in that regard, the story of Hiruluk is much the same. Hiruluk was a quack doctor from Drum Island. He wasn't the most upstanding person, he had been a thief, and even as a doctor, his methods weren't exactly the greatest. But Hiruluk had an ambitious dream, to make sakura blossom in his own land, something that sounded ludicrous and impossible. Yet, despite finding a solution to it, time was catching up with him, and his terminal disease didn't allow him to achieve his objective. But that was fine because Hiruluk knew that he wouldn't be forgotten. He knew that there would be those that would remember him, those who would be willing to inherit his will, and it's particularly Kureha who ended up carrying out his dream. Years later, Kureha would eventually make Hiruluk's dream happen and make Sakura blossom in the middle of this winter wonderland. And Hiruluk knew, he understood that he would be remembered, and because his dream would be remembered, it meant that his will would be inherited. And that's exactly all it is. The title of the chapter where Hiruluk gave us the answer to what inherited will is, where he gave us his incredible speech, it tells us everything we need to know. One Piece, chapter 145, Inherited Will. At its core, this message is something so very simple. This great big mystery in the story, in the end, is really just a lesson that Oda is teaching us. I'd like to take this time, if I'm allowed, to tell a bit of a personal story. Across life, I've lost many things. While I know my life has not been nowhere near as horrible as that of others, I wouldn't say I've had it easy. There's been a lot of hardships and a lot of suffering and sorrow. And among that suffering came a sense of loss. Across life, I've lost people I've known, I've lost places where I belonged, and I've lost experiences that I know I'll never get again. I know there are things in my life that I will never see again. And that is something that I deeply struggled for a long while. Across my life, I've met many great people and I've encountered many great experiences, but I've had to say goodbye to all of those times. Some of the fondest moments I've lived through eventually all came to an end. The people you meet, the things you live through, each has a defined start and a defined end. That's simply how life works. But sometimes it can be hard to say goodbye because you don't want them to go away. But it is through reading One Piece that I realized that was never the case. None of these things truly went away because they would only die when I'd forget about them. As long as I remembered, they would live on within me forever. Because people are so much more than just chunks of flesh. They are the embodiment of emotions, feelings, memories, and experiences. And even after they pass away, those things remain with us. Even after someone dies, their will lives on within us. The lessons they've taught us, the feelings they've conveyed us, the memories we share together, and the dreams they've passed on to us, they all live on in our hearts. Even after death, they live on in all of us because we remember them, and in their place we continue to carry out their dreams, their love, their will, and we weave it through history. We pass down our love and our dreams to those who come after us, and in that way ensure that none of us ever truly die. And in that regard, I legitimately believe that One Piece will be the same. One Piece will end one day. Our days of enjoying this series together will come to an end, and we'll have to say goodbye. But that doesn't mean that One Piece will die, because Oda and his incredible tale will keep living on in all of our hearts as long as we remember it. So why should we cry, if not laugh? And once you start looking at it that way, you realize that this theme has been present all across the entire series. Even within this flashback, Dalton asked Hiruluk, "Can the same happen for a country?" And Hiruluk replied, "As long as it is inherited." After which, Dalton told himself that he would inherit the will of his former king and bring this country back to prosperity, something that he would eventually achieve, inheriting the dream and carrying it out. And so many more examples can be found across the series. At the end of Dressrosa, when Law asks about Roshinante, Sengoku simply told Law this: "If you really want to do something for him, then let us both remember him in our memory." And what is it that Luffy told Ace right when he died? "You said that you would never die, right?" And Ace replied, "Yes." Because Luffy would eventually inherit Ace's will. Luffy would carry out his own will, his dying wish, which was, quite simply as Ace put it, to see Luffy achieve the goal at the end of his dream, to achieve his dream of throwing the world's biggest party. And it's because Ace knew that his will would be inherited that he died with a smile. That is why all those whose wills have been inherited die with a smile. This isn't something unique to the D-Clan, we see it with so many people because everyone whose will is inherited know that they won't die. Like Toki said to Oden, "What point there is to cry upon death if you're not really going to die? If you know you will live on, then what point is there to being sad? Because you can say goodbye with a smile on your face." Roger died with a smile, living life with a great loud laughter, because he knew that his will would be inherited, meaning that he wouldn't die. And the same can be said for Soul, for Whitebeard, for Pedro, for Yasuye, for Tohime, for Fisher Tiger, and for all those whose wills have been inherited, because they knew their dreams would come to pass. That is quite simply what the Wheel of Dreams is about. Joy Boy knew that he would live, that he would cross across 800 years, not because he would actually live beyond death as a ghost or anything, but because his dream would live on, and in that way, so would he. Even after his death, someone would inherit his dream, and then someone else would inherit that dream from them, and then to someone else, and someone else, and someone else, through 800 years, traveling through those 800 years, all the way down to Roger. And then even Roger would die, but his dream would live on by being inherited by someone else, someone who one day would finally bring forth the dawn, not because of destiny or fate, but because it's their dream. That's all that the Will of D really is. Kureha, who had inherited Hiruluk's will, upon seeing Luffy's determination, she simply said, "So the Will of D lives on." Joy Boy knew someone would find the One Piece because he believed his dream would be inherited across the ages, until someone inherited it at the right time. It was a gamble, a bet on the new era, a bet on the dawn, as Shax put it, but Joy Boy believed in it. That's why he had the poneglyphs made, so that the story of his people would not be forgotten, so that his ideals, his dream, the ones that the world government feared, would not be forgotten. That's exactly why the world government brought about this great censorship. That's why they erased an entire century, because they wanted to do all they could so that Joy Boy would be forgotten. But Joy Boy trusted in those that would remember him. He trusted his allies to protect the poneglyphs until the future came, and believed that someone would one day inherit his dream. That the swell of an era would come and bring forth a new era, a new dawn. And the person who would do so would finally become the true new Joy Boy who would inherit this title. After all, Joy Boy is just that, a title, the boy who brings joy, and one day someone would take that title to become the new Joy Boy, the one Oden was waiting for. That is why Kaido said in chapter 1014 that Luffy did not manage to become the new Joy Boy, because Luffy had the potential to become Joy Boy, but in that occasion failed and would have to rise up to the challenge again to achieve it. Luffy was not born the Joy Boy, he had to work to become it. He has to become someone capable to guide the ancient weapons, someone capable to bring down the borders dividing the world, and someone capable of finding the One Piece and use it to unite the entire world together, to connect everybody together, to put an end to segregation and bring joy to everyone. All of these dreams, Oden and Yasuya's dream to open the borders of Wano, Hero Luke's dream to make Sakura blossom and heal his country, Soul's dream to see Robin finally find friends, Roshinante's dream to have Law be free and to stop Doflamingo and save Dressrosa, Otohime's dream to unite the world all under the same sun, Pedro's dream to help bring the dawn of the world, Ace's dream to see Luffy fulfill his party, and Roger and Joy Boy's dream to bring freedom to everyone. All of these dreams would be inherited by different individuals, bringing all of these dreams to fruition. In the end, that's all that inherited will means. That people's dreams...
終わらねえそうだろう
おいおいてめえ何急に叫び出すんだよ
人の夢がなんだって。
笑われていこうじゃねえか。高みを目指せば出す拳の見つからねえ喧嘩もあるもんだなあおい
But that is a story no one yet knows about.
受け継がれゆく意志時代のうねり人の夢人々が自由の答えを求める限りそれらは決してとどまることはない
What is the One Piece? This is without a doubt the biggest mystery in the history of this manga, perhaps one of the biggest mysteries in the history of fiction. Despite being the title of one of the best-selling literary franchises of all time, the answer to what One Piece actually means still remains unanswered. In all its years of publication, no one has been able to uncover what the One Piece is. But I would actually argue the complete opposite, because I believe that I know what the One Piece is, but at the same time, I also believe that you know what the One Piece is, that we all know what it is. I believe that every single person who has ever read One Piece, even if they've only read a single chapter, already know what the treasure is. Because ever since chapter 1, the very beginning of the series, Oda hid the treasure right under our noses, despite no one noticing in all these years of publication. Across the entirety of One Piece, across some of the most iconic and memorable scenes in the series, Oda has shown it time and time again, and yet without the proper context, you would have never guessed what it really is. So by the end of this, not only will I prove to you what I believe is the true identity of the One Piece treasure, show you how it's been hidden in plain sight across some of the most iconic and memorable scenes in the whole series, and how it ties with some of the most fundamental narrative themes of One Piece, but also how Eiichiro Oda has managed to hide the greatest mystery in the history of manga without a single person noticing, right under our very eyes. This is the biggest and grandest One Piece theory ever created, one that took over 5 years to create, my magnum opus. This is the conclusion of the true history, the ultimate theory about the identity of the One Piece. So our entire search revolves around this treasure known as One Piece. And as Roger indicated, this treasure was left behind by an individual called Joy Boy. I believe that much like Roger and Luffy, Joy Boy was also a pirate who once set out to sea in search of adventure, and across his many travels he grew in fame and power, eventually attaining a position of Pirate King. This title might have been bestowed to him because Joy Boy had founded a great kingdom of immense proportions, but the immensity of this kingdom might not refer to actual physical surface, but rather by the fact that said kingdom was not limited to the confines of its home island. Countless people from all across the world were part of this kingdom, being all those who Joy Boy befriended across his travels. In a sense, you could argue that perhaps this was less of a kingdom, and more simply like an enormous pirate crew. We know this by the fact that the Great Kingdom boasted allies from all corners of the world, from the Wano country to the Minks, the Fishmen, the Shandorians, and many more. But the most important thing to note about Joy Boy's allies is that they were all from different races. Minks, Seafolk, Skyfolk, Kuja, Giants, all different from the vast majority that ruled the world. Humans. And because of this diversity, the world was plagued by a disastrous problem: racism and discrimination. For example, it's been mentioned that the fishmen were once driven out of the surface to the ocean floor by humans as an act of discrimination, or how we've seen the Tontata were hunted and persecuted even before the start of the Void Century, indicating this was an issue that stretched back for centuries. Because humans had the superiority in numbers, these races were persecuted, which led to discrimination and even enslavement, something that we can see in no better example than the King Don Quixote of ancient times, enslaving the entire Tontata tribe for the wealth of Dressrosa. And this went beyond just other races, because even humans oppressed themselves, with the privileged ruling from the top. On the other hand, however, you had someone like Joy Boy, someone who, thanks to his travels and broadening his horizons, came to become friend and ally to many of the world's races, and his ideals of freedom as a pirate made him yearn for a world where all people could be equal and free. And that was Joy Boy's ultimate goal, to bring and unite the whole world together, to turn the current corrupt system of the world upside down, bring an end to discrimination and slavery, and allow all to be free. Joy Boy's goal, in simple terms, was to allow all species to live under the same sun, the same goal that would be inherited by the descendants of the Sea Folk, and particularly Queen Otohime. The sun symbolizes the union of all races being able to live together, as well as joy, happiness, and laughter, and so Joy Boy made the sun his symbol. This is why the sun is featured across the emblems of so many of Joy Boy's allied kingdoms, and why Joy Boy himself came to be called by some people as the Sun God, he who would free all slaves and those discriminated from oppression by bringing them laughter. Joy Boy would call this ultimate plan of his the dawn of the world, the day when the sun would rise, or, put it quite simply, the romance dawn. The dawn of adventure. And the way that he wanted to achieve that was by quite literally uniting the entire world together. He wanted to destroy the Red Line and the Grand Line to fuse all the seas together into the All Blue, a sea that had been lost to time and became nothing more than a legend ever since the world became divided. It is for this exact purpose that Joy Boy wanted to use the ancient weapons, because just like we are told in the story, the weapons will eventually bring the destruction of the world. But this is not a destruction meant in a negative sense, but rather as a way to destroy the barriers that were dividing people, stopping them from being free and able to move across the world. While we can't fully discern the identity of two of the weapons, we already know how Poseidon operates, being able to command the enormous species known as Sea Kings. Because of that, Poseidon would be instrumental in undoing the calm belts, where the Sea Kings reside, thus being able to undo the Grand Line. And when one of the other weapons would destroy the Red Line, then Poseidon would be needed to lift the Ark Noah, which all the citizens of Fisherman Island could board to be emigrated to the surface, while the remains of the Red Line falling down would crush and destroy Fishman Island, just like Charlie prophesied a man wearing a straw hat would one day help bring. However, it seems that Joy Boy was not able to accomplish this. It is possible that the mermaid princess of that time perished during the conflict against the 20 allied nations of humans who opposed Joy Boy's ideals, hence why he wrote an apology letter in her name, and thus the destruction of the world leading to its union could not happen. And we know for a fact that the weapon Poseidon is only reborn every several hundred years, the exact same term that has always been used to refer to the distance of time between the Void Century and the present. In other words, Poseidon is only reborn every 800 years, which means that Joy Boy and his people would have to wait 800 years all the way to present day in the story for Poseidon to reappear, and for someone, a new Joy Boy, to appear and guide the ancient weapons, to destroying the world so it could be reborn anew in a unified form, just as it is told in prophecies of old. A long night would set where the allied nations, now forming as the world government, would hold an iron grip over the world. But once that night would be over, the D would bring a massive storm that would shake the entire world, which could quite literally be an actual storm, considering a certain prominent D member has the ability to create storms with his powers. But once that storm would be over, finally, at last, the sun would rise again, leading to the dawn of the world, to a new beginning. And in order to ensure that one day a new Joy Boy would appear, he made sure that his will would one day be inherited. For that we need to understand what inherited will means, but it's quite simple because Dr. Heroic already told us exactly what inherited will is. That people only die when they are forgotten. So in other words, if someone isn't forgotten, their will, their own dreams live on, just like they did for Heroic. And in a similar regard, Joy Boy's dream would be passed down, both through the poneglyphs and individuals inheriting his dream generation through generation. The world government tried to stop this dream from being inherited, which is why they purged all information from the Void Century, in an attempt that Joy Boy would be forgotten, and thus, just as Heroic put it, that he would die with his dream being forgotten. Because just as Clover said, the world government was most afraid of Joy Boy's dream and ideals. And yet his dream was inherited across the ages, from person to person, until it was inherited by Gull D. Roger, and later, of course, Monkey D. Luffy. The exact same dream that they both declared in front of others and left them completely dumbfounded. The dream to throw the biggest party in the world. I think that Joy Boy's dream, beyond destroying the Red Line and the Grand Line and unifying the world, was to throw the biggest party anyone could imagine. After all, the world, even if united physically, would still be suffering from the scars of segregation that spanned across entire centuries. So to unite the hearts and souls of people, Joy Boy wanted to throw a massive party that could connect and unite everybody in the world. We've seen how a party like the one at the end of Skypiea was able to put a stop to a 400-year-long war, so one big enough to invite everybody from all across the world could quite possibly bring an end to all conflicts for good. In the end, Joy Boy wanted to connect the world together, to toss away suffering and sadness, and instead exchange it with joy and laughter, hence why he came to be known as the Joy Boy, for his goal was to bring joy to all those in the world, all through the act of a massive party where everyone could laugh together. But since Joy Boy could not unite the world together and would have to wait 800 years since someone could guide the weapons to do so, he had to give up on that party until then. So in order that someone could one day pull off that massive party, he left behind a treasure. A treasure that could be used after the ancient weapons unify the world to connect all its people together. A treasure that could quite literally connect the world as one piece. But what treasure could be so special to bring everyone together and make such a massive party a reality? That's exactly what we're here to find out. We could speculate and try to guess what it is, but instead I suggest that we bring together the remaining puzzle pieces to finally solve this eternal riddle once and for all. Oda may not have left that many clues to the identity of the treasure, but the few he left behind will be enough for us to connect all dots together. Let us see exactly what these clues are all about. Our first clue lies at the very beginning of the series, on the very first page in fact, being the final words that Roger uttered. "My treasure, if you want it, it can be yours. I left everything in this world at that place." These might not seem important at first, but the more you think about it, the more you start to realize how everything in this world is actually far more than just a fake statement. But there is another very important scene later in the series that uses this exact same term to tell us what everything in the world really means. Because it's during one of the most important scenes in the series where the meaning of these words becomes a lot clearer. when Roger left. As Odin indicated in his journal, on that day we reached the final island. We learned everything in this world. This would indicate that everything in the world refers in a sense to the truth of the world because it encompasses everything one would like to know about everything there is in the world. At first glance, this would suggest that One Piece is actually knowledge, all the details of the true history one would desire to know. However, it's important to note that it's never necessarily been implied that everything in this world refers to the treasure itself. Roger simply stated that he left everything in this world at that place, on the final island, not that that was the treasure itself. That means that the final island possesses knowledge of everything in this world, but that in itself may or may not necessarily be the actual physical treasure, just something extra that is included there as Odin described it. However, as we'll soon see, this will prove to be a key clue to understanding the true nature of this treasure. So if you're new to this channel, then first, welcome! Please consider subscribing. But second, something we usually do in this channel is break down the Japanese version of One Piece and help explain a lot of linguistic details that often get lost in translation. And so, it's fitting that our second clue is a fact that Western fans are often unaware of. One Piece is technically not the full name of the treasure. You see, in written Japanese, there's something known as the phonetic reading and the kanji reading. Without going too much into complicated grammar, to put it as simply as possible, in manga it's possible to write certain terms with two different readings, which allows certain words to have a double meaning. And believe it or not, the word One Piece is the same, as in many instances, while the word One Piece is written with that phonetic reading, the English words One Piece, it is also written with a kanji reading. Hitotsunagi no Daihiho. So, to break it down, Daihiho means great hidden treasure. What really matters to us is Hitotsunagi, because traditionally in Japanese, Hitotsunagi means something that is in a single piece. So the kanji reading would become the great hidden treasure in one piece. Relatively straightforward, right? Or so it would first seem. Because in reality, there's a glaring issue in the way that kanji reading is written, as Hitotsunagi is not written in kanji, but with its phonetic reading, meaning, in simple terms, that we don't actually know what Hitotsunagi really actually means. Since Japanese is filled to the brim with homophones, it's often really hard to tell what a word means without the kanji reading, and in this case, we don't know what the real meaning of Hitotsunagi is because we lack its kanji and it has potential different readings, and thus, One Piece could refer to several different things. On one hand, there's the meaning we already mentioned, where Hitotsunagi can mean something in one piece. But another meaning can be if we separate the two words at a different syllable, as Hitotsunagi. Hito is the Japanese word for people, while tsunagi refers to something that connects. Specifically, it refers to something being tied, like the image of a rope. But it's also used with a metaphorical meaning to refer to the bonds that tie people together. After all, in Japanese folklore, it is believed that people are tied by strings, so this word is often used in anime and literature to represent one thing: connection. In other words, Hitotsunagi can mean that which connects people together. And it's in fact this very expression that one character uses in one of the most important scenes in the series to refer to a certain object we've seen before that reveals exactly to us what the One Piece is. But we'll get back to that later. Because we're not done yet, as Hitotsunagi can also mean one sea at peace. Specifically, Nagi can mean a sea that is calm with no waves. These could tie into the idea we discussed of the Red Line and the Grand Line being destroyed, uniting all the seas into the All Blue, and thus turning the world into one sea. And after the swell of an era arrives and the storm that the day will bring takes place, the turbulent waters stirred by the storm will finally calm down and become at peace. and as such the one sea at peace could refer to the all blue, a singular one sea that is united as one, and that is finally at peace after a long and turbulent storm. What I'm getting at with this whole Hitotsunagi thing is that the Japanese reading for One Piece has multiple different meanings. And by extension, I think with this, Oda is trying to tell us that the word One Piece itself isn't limited to a single concept. I think it's more of an ideology that extends to several different things. Of course, don't get me wrong, there is the one physical treasure located at the final island, that much we know for a fact. But I think the word One Piece could also refer to other things beyond it. It could refer to the world unified as One Piece after it becomes the All Blue. It could even refer to the people themselves being united as One Piece, all living connected under the same sun, just like Joy Boy wanted. But beyond all that, I think that One Piece also refers to one more thing, to the laugh tale that Roger heard. And this is the most important clue of all, what is potentially the most important and iconic scene in the entire series. The moment when Roger finally arrived at the Laugh Tale. At that time, when Roger stood in front of that enormous treasure, he laughed. And so did we. We laughed until tears came out of our eyes. And it's with this that Roger proclaimed, "Joy Boy, what an unbelievable treasure you left behind. What a laugh tale." And this is kind of important, in fact. Roger found it so important that he decided to call the island itself Laugh Tale, as a cheeky allusion to the story that he found there. Furthermore, this could be exactly what Oden referred to by everything in this world, the knowledge of the Void Century, all encompassed within a story, the story of Joy Boy's people. This would explain Roger's final words, because alongside the One Piece, he also left behind everything in this world, or in other words, a laugh tale that tells us about the truth of history, as indicated by the name he decided to give to the island. So I think that ultimately the All Blue, the idea of unifying the world, the laugh tale that tells of the Void Century, and the physical treasure in the final island are all different things, even if they could all be referred to by the words One Piece. Could this story, this laugh tale, perhaps then be the key to everything we need to know? If we only had access to this story, then not only would it reveal everything that happened during the Void Century and give us answers to some of the biggest mysteries of the series, but it could outright even reveal what the One Piece itself is. If only Oda didn't hide it from us and we would be able to read it like Roger did, then we could finally find the answer to this mystery. This story would be our final key to solving the mystery of the One Piece. But unfortunately, we don't have access to this story, leaving this mystery forever unsolved. Or do we? Because I would argue the complete opposite. I think that Oda has hid this story right under our noses somewhere in the manga, allowing us to actually access it, be able to read it, and discover all the secrets of the Void Century. But that only leaves the question, where did he hide it? How could he hide it? What is the laugh tale that Roger listened to? As we come to the climax of our journey, before I reveal to you the most fundamental clue in this puzzle, I'd like to share a personal story. The story of how I came to find the One Piece myself. You see, there's something that I had always wanted to achieve for many years of my life. As someone with a long history of serious health issues, this is a dream that kept falling out of my reach. But finally, in 2019, I was finally able to achieve it. The dream to go to Japan. I went to live in Japan for 3 months in what I can only describe as one of the most incredible experiences of my life. But what matters to us is not that, but the fact that by sheer coincidence, or who knows, perhaps fate, my visit there just happened to line up with the release of a One Piece movie, But not just any One Piece movie, but One Piece Stampede, perhaps the most important film ever created for this series. For the first time in a One Piece film, Stampede was crammed to the brim with references and teases to the endgame of the story, and at the center of all that was the reveal that the final island we all thought was called Raftel was in fact Laugh Tale. A whole 5 months before it was revealed in the actual manga, meaning that moviegoers who had the chance to watch this movie on release day, like me, were the first in the world to ever discover this unbelievable plot twist. But while some didn't think much of it, thinking it was just a weird dramatization, when I first walked out of the theater on August 9th, 2019, I realized that this name, Laugh Tale, had to be the key to everything. Because we had heard these words before in the story, the words Laugh Tale, describing the story that tells us everything we need to know. The story that hides all the mysteries in the series, including the identity of the treasure itself. And that's when everything began to click in. When was it that we had heard of this Laugh Tale before? What is a story that details all the events of the Void Century? What is a story that had existed since the time Joy Boy was alive? What is a story that can be inherited just like inherited will? What is a story that every time it is heard, it always causes everyone to burst in laughter, just like the Roger Pirates did? And most importantly of all, what is a story that can be used at parties? A story that will be used in the world's biggest party to connect everyone in the world together.
おいブルック、この曲俺知ってんぞ。シャンクスたちが歌ってた。
ええ、昔の海賊たちはみんなこれを歌ってました。辛い時も楽しい時も。
The laugh tale that Roger heard is, of course, none other than Binks' sake. The story of a joyous boy named Binks, and the story of his great kingdom. A story that every time it is sung, it always results in everyone laughing together. A story that is sung at parties to help connect people together. One that has been passed down this entire time right under our own eyes, just like it has been passed under the eyes of the world government, surviving across its censorship and telling in secret the events of the Void Century, the truth of the world, in the form of a joyful song, of a laugh tale. This is a song that we even saw played across the entirety of chapter 967, right before the Roger Pirates arrived at Laugh Tale. In that chapter, we see them sing part of the song, but for some reason the final verses are missing. Is that perhaps because they are not missing but are simply being played over the final sing as the Roger Pirates laughed? After all, even the anime played the song again right before memories kicked in. After all, the Japanese word for laugh tale, warai banashi, strictly refers to a story that has been passed down orally, not in the form of writing, so it makes sense that this tale exists in the form of a song. Not to mention, don't Crocus and Odin arm in arm look like they are dancing and singing, just like we've seen others dance in the exact same pose when Binks' sake has been played? What else could the Roger Pirates have been doing in this scene but listening or singing to Binks' sake. Brook mentioned that this song was sung in ancient times by pirates of those ancient eras, which would indicate that the song existed ever since the Void Century. Luffy even stated that Shanks and his crew often sang that song, and we even get to see a shot of them singing it in Chapter 1, which could indicate that the song did in fact appear from the very first chapter of the manga, but was simply left off screen. This would indicate that this song is something that Oda planned for a very long time, something we can actually prove, since Oda stated that he had Kohei Tanaka, the composer of the One Piece anime, make the tune several years before Thriller Bark even happened, going as far back as the early 2000s, shortly after One Piece started serializing. And Oda even stated that this is a song he hoped would go down in history, and one day be taught to future generations in schools across Japan. That's how important of a song it was to him. It's no doubt a song that is iconic to any One Piece fan, a song that I learned to memorize ever since I was a kid, even before I learned Japanese, one that many consider to be synonymous with the series. But it's not just this that points to the importance this song holds for the Void Century. Robin commented that this song was nostalgic to her. One might first assume she might have first heard it on a pirate crew while she was on the run, but you have to remember the word nostalgia, both in English and Japanese, refers strictly to fond memories. And the only even remotely fond memory Robin had were those at Ohara with the scholars, meaning that she must have heard that song from them, which undeniably links it with the research of the Void Century. Furthermore, we talked about how the Sea Kings mentioned that the whales would rejoice once Poseidon and Joy Boy would meet again, which would lead to the destruction of the Red Line, something that we've seen the whales attempting to do for so many years. This would suggest that the whales, which we've seen are far more intelligent than other animals, were, in a sense, allied with the wishes of the sea folk, as well as the people of the Great Kingdom. This would explain why when Brook played Binks' sake to the whales at the entrance of the New World, they smiled and saw the Straw Hats as allies, helping them head to the New World. And in fact, that may be the reason why Laboon, lost from its family and separated from its pack, found a new family when he saw the Rumber Pirates. Because when they played Binks' sake in front of him, he recognized a tune that the other whales also sang. And with it, Laboon laughed. And that's perhaps the most telling clue to the importance of this song. Because every time it is played, it always results in laughter. It's a song that causes people to laugh when it is heard, because it is quite literally a laugh tale, a story that induces laughter. Whether it's the laughter of the little Laboon, to the laughing Roger Pirates, or the laughter it has induced in the many parties it has been played in, Binks' sake always causes laughter. It's a story that, as Brook put it, is sung in times of sorrow, but also in times of joy. Because while it is a story that tells of a sad and harrowing event, of the eradication of Joy Boy's people and the long night that came after, beneath it all, it also has a spirit of hope, of a dawn that one day will come and bask the world in its light once more, bringing joy and laughter to all those that this song connects. That is why Joy Boy left behind this song, in order to help connect people together at parties, so that the world would be united. Much like the Rumber Pirates, Joy Boy and his people likely passed away in tragic circumstances, and yet in their final moments they still sang, danced, smiled, and laughed, because they knew that even in such sorrow, their dreams would be inherited, and that was enough to bring them joy. It's this core idea of the dream of this massive party being inherited across the ages that is detailed in the story of Binks' sake. It's in the lyrics of this song that we are told the full history of the Great Kingdom, and more specifically, the story of the One Piece. Let's go to deliver Binks' sake. Let the sea breeze and the waves carry us. Beyond the tide, the sunset goes wild. A song of birds drawn in circles to the sky. The first verse already tells us some very important information. For one, it mentions the sunset going wild, which refers to the sun setting after Joy Boy failed to unite the world together, which would lead to the long night, or in other words, the symbol of the rule of the world government, and later the dawn of a new world. Similarly, beyond the tide could refer to the swell of an era, the expression of a new era that will come like a massive unstoppable wave that has been used by several characters across the series, including by Roger in his final speech. This could also be inferred in the words wave, which refers once again to the swell of an era, or in other words, a tide, a wave, and sea breeze could represent wind or the coming of a storm, the storm that the D will bring with the swell of an era. Then there's also the line Wa okaku tori no uta. This line is often translated as birds sing as they draw circles in the sky, but if translated more literally, it just means a song of birds drawn in circles to the sky. And what are birds drawn in circles? Why, of course, the Kozuki clan, whose mark is literally that of birds drawn in circles. And this song of theirs would refer to Binks' sake itself, because after all, if it is the laugh tale that Roger read on the final island, then it is likely the Kozuki clan is the one that carved this song on poneglyphs in order to ensure that it would one day be passed down. The next verse mentions, "Goodbye, port town, goodbye, my hometown, singing with one dawn, a song of a ship sailing. Gold and silver waves too, they spray back into the blue. We are going to split the seas." This verse details having to say goodbye to a hometown. This could likely refer to the people of the Great Kingdom having to say goodbye to their hometown, the Great Kingdom itself, after it was lost to the world government. They have to say goodbye singing with one dawn, that song being, of course, Binks' sake itself, singing goodbye much like the Rumber pirates had to say goodbye to their lives, hoping that their song would one day be inherited. The word dawn refers to the sound effect that we've seen plastered across the entire series, though it could also refer to the word dawn in English, referring of course to the Ramen's dawn. And the final line says, "We are going to split the seas." This expression, to split the seas, is the same that Odin used to refer to the war that would take place in the future, when the seas would literally be split, caused by the destruction of the Red Line and the Grand Line, splitting the seas and unifying them all into the All Blue, with the mention of waves being repeated again to allude to the swell of an era. And this is reiterated once again in the following verse, stating that we pirates break the seas. The storm has come from a faraway sky. The waves are dancing, sound the drums. If you lose your nerve, this breath could be your last. There is no way tomorrow's morning sun won't rise. This verse directly mentions the all-important storm, the storm that the D will bring again, that will engulf the entire world, leading to the final conflict of the series. The waves are mentioned again, saying they will start dancing, stirred by the storm and the swell of an era, but at the same time the song says to sound the drums. At first, one might make the mistake to think that drums indicate the arrival of war, but much like we saw in Skypiea, drums can also herald the arrival of a party, the party that would come after the storm. After all, there's no way tomorrow's morning sun won't rise, as the dawn of the world will certainly come. Let's go to deliver Binks' sake. It'll happen one day, the evening dream. A shadow waving by that I will never meet again. But what are you brooding for? Tomorrow the night moon will still be there. This verse is about describing the concept of inherited will that we talked about in a previous episode. People only die when they are forgotten, but that means that as long as people's dreams are remembered, they will never die, and thus, people's dreams will never end. In this case, the evening dream, or in other words, the dream right before the sunset, the arrival of the night, the dream of Joy Boy's people of one day ushering in a new dawn, will happen one day. A shadow that we will never meet again waves us goodbye. The shadow representing those who we've lost, those who died and have remained behind, us unable to ever meet them again. However, what are you brooding for? What need is there to be sad? As tomorrow, or in other words, once a new morning comes and the dawn takes place, the night moon will still be there. As we mentioned before, the night moon is a term used in Toki's poem during her final words, one that in that context represented Odin himself, but it's a term that also refers to all those that have passed away. We saw Ace similarly being referred to as a night moon, as it represents those who have passed away before the dawn came. But as the song mentions, the night moon, or those who have died, will still be there once the tomorrow and the dawn come, because those people will live on as long as we remember them. As we've been told so many times across the series, the dawn will shine even in the world beyond, and its light will be delivered to even those who have left us behind. And this is once again reminded to us in the final verse, where not only is the one sea, the all blue, mentioned once again, but so is the idea that no matter who you are, we all end up as bones. Because in the end, we all die. But that is fine, because as long as we are remembered, even if we end up as bones, we will always live on. And finally, the song closes off with the iconic words that Roger used to describe the story he listened to on that final island. Let's go to deliver Binks' sake. Let's sing with one dawn a song of a sea. It doesn't matter who you are, we all end up as bones. A never-ending, ever-wandering laugh tale. Binks' sake is this laugh tale. It says it in the lyrics directly. It's a laugh tale that tells us everything in the world, what happened to Joy Boy's people, and what his hopes were for what would happen in the future when someone would find the One Piece. If we decode them and summarize them, the song's lyrics tell us the full story. Let's go to deliver Binks' sake. The sun is setting and our kingdom is coming to an end. But this song will be preserved by the Kosuke clan. We must say goodbye to our hometown. However, one day we are going to split the seas by destroying the Red Line and the Grand Line. The storm of the day will come, as will the swell of an era. But there's no way the dawn won't come and the sun won't rise. Our dream before the sunset will happen one day. Those who have left us behind wave us goodbye. But why be sad, because those who have died will still be there tomorrow when the sun rises. Let's sing about one dawn, a song of the all blue, because even if we die, we'll all live on as long as our dreams are remembered, just like this never-ending, ever-wandering laugh tale. Yo-ho-ho-ho, yo-ho-ho-ho, yo-ho-ho-ho. Yo ho ho ho. Yo ho ho ho. The song concludes with a loud and joyful laughter. The chorus of the song is literally laughter. Yo ho ho ho. The laughter that is always so commonly associated with pirates. Because this is a laugh tale that always brings laugh and makes people laugh as they sing it. It details the story of the Great Kingdom, its eventual fate, but also the survival of its people by living through being remembered. This tale reveals us all the mysteries in this story. But if so, one question remains. Does it also reveal what the One Piece is? Of course it does. In fact, it states it time and time again through the entire song, to the point that it couldn't be more obvious once you realize it. If you've been paying attention, you might have realized yourself already all this time, since the very start. The One Piece, which has been there right under our own eyes ever since chapter 1 and across the entire series, has its identity revealed in this Laugh Tale. It's something that has connected Luffy since the very beginning all the way up until the end, the one thing capable of connecting everyone together as one, something which will finally connect and unify the entire world in the world's biggest party as One Piece, just like it forged Luffy's very first connection.
お前ら知ってるか？杯を交わすと兄弟になれるんだ。
兄弟？本当かよ！
俺たちの絆は兄弟としてつなぐ。
The One Piece is sake itself. The physical treasure waiting at the end of the seas on the island of Laugh Tale is sake itself, Binks' sake. Ace himself said it better than anyone else. Right before exchanging sake cups with Luffy and Sabo, using the exact same word, tsunagu,
兄弟としてつなぐ。
that exists in Hitotsunagi, he's literally telling us that sake is something that connects people together. Sake connects people as one. It literally makes us One Piece. Like a lot of elements in One Piece, this is something that ties a lot with Japanese culture and the customs that come with sake there, far more than in most other countries. In Japan, sake has a lot of cultural importance, as drinking is considered something that connects people together. Hito Tsunagi. It's a moment when the strict social boundaries of Japanese society can be thrown away and people can celebrate together as equals, and as such, it is considered very common to go out drinking with others to have a good time. And of course, what is it that happens when you drink a lot? Well, you start laughing. Sake is something that brings people together and allows them to party hand in hand, resulting in a lot of joy and laughter, just like we have seen in the series time and time again. Furthermore, in Japan, it is custom to offer sake to the deceased, which ties with the idea that the One Piece is something that will reach even those who have passed away and were not able to be present there to witness it. So even if they have died, the One Piece and the dawn of the world will still be delivered to them even in the world beyond, something the lyrics of Binks' sake makes very clear. But I don't need to tell you the importance of sake in Japanese culture, because even the manga itself does a great job at already explaining its importance in canon. Just like in Japan, the exchange of sake cups is meant to be a sign of brotherhood, of family. It's a ritual that allows those who are not tied by blood to become like family. We saw this with Luffy, Ace and Sabo becoming brothers, as well as Luffy exchanging sake every time a new crew member joined his crew to form a bond of friendship with them, a bond stronger than blood, stronger than anything else, that will ensure that they remain friends forever, a bond of nakama. And thus, at the final island at the ends of the seas, lies one piece of sake that will allow Luffy to connect with so many more than just his crew, but with people from all over the world. Luffy will finally be able to make the biggest party in the world a reality, and bring everybody together to live under the same sun. Roger was too early because the ancient weapons had not been reborn yet, and so the Red Line and the Grand Line could not be destroyed to unify the world into the All Blue. Because of that, the people of the world still remained segregated, the world government still held its iron grip over the world, and thus it would be impossible to bring people from all over the world to throw the world's biggest party. But once that is achieved, once a new Joy Boy appears to guide the ancient weapons, just like Otohime foretold, then finally the original Joy Boy's treasure, the sake he brewed while waiting for Luffy, will finally be put to use to connect the entire world together in one massive party. In the end, One Piece is a story about pirates, so what better treasure is there for pirates than a bottle of booze just like all the pirate stories of old. In that regard, there really is no more fitting treasure to bring the series to such a climactic culmination than sake. But One Piece being sake is something that is far more fitting beyond even everything we've mentioned so far. Because just like I stated, the One Piece has been hidden under our eyes this entire time, ever since the very beginning, ever since chapter 1. In the very first chapter of the series, right after the beginning, most of the chapter took place inside a bar literally called Parties, may I remind you, where we saw the red-haired pirates partying and exchanging sake, something that inspired Luffy enough to awaken in him the dream to throw the biggest party in the world. The exact same dream that Roger had mentioned so many years prior. But even more important than that is the scene that followed after, the one that set up the entire conflict and the core theme for the starting chapter of this series. The party of the pirates was suddenly interrupted by a band of bandits. And what is it that Shanks did in that occasion? He offered Higuma a bottle of sake. In chapter 1, since the very start of the series, we saw Shanks offering the equivalent of the One Piece to Higuma as a way to offer a bond of friendship. Higuma, however, rejected the bottle of sake, smashing it in Shanks' face because he refuses to exchange sake. He wants all the sake for himself. But in face of that, what did Shanks do? He laughed. Because Shanks knows how foolish it is to want to monopolize something like that. Sake should be shared. It should be used to help connect people together, to laugh together. Ever since the very start, Oda established this fundamental theme about the identity of the One Piece. And it's this core theme that ties together, that connects together the entire series. But it doesn't stop just there, because across the entire series, across some of the most iconic and memorable scenes of the story, we see sake right under our eyes again and again. After Luffy witnessed the incident with Shanks and then proclaimed his dream in front of Ace and Sabo, what did Ace do? He exchanged sake between the three of them to connect them in a bond of brotherhood, laying the first step to Luffy's dream, one that would one day be accomplished by exchanging sake with people from all over the world. Then, in chapter 100, when the Straw Hats entered the Grand Line, they declared their vows to reach their dreams. And where did they do it? Over a barrel of sake, a scene that is also later paralleled in the anime. At Drum Island, when Hero Luke bid his farewell and explained to us just what exactly inherited will is, that people die when they are forgotten, what is it that he did with his final action? He drank a cup of sake. And Kureha also drank from a bottle of sake as a sign that she would inherit his will. When Bellamy mocked Luffy at Jaya, saying that the One Piece doesn't exist, he stated that fools never notice the real treasure around them, surrounded by so many bottles of sake. And as Luffy and the others left the bar, Blackbeard laughed in the face of Bellamy, claiming that dreams are real, the dreams never end, and that the One Piece does in fact exist, as he slammed down to the ground a bottle of sake, symbolizing the existence of the One Piece. During the flashback in Skypiea, we saw Nolan and Kalgara being able to bond together through sake, connecting the two of them together despite being so different, something that would later be recalled at the big party at the end of the arc where everybody gets to exchange sake together as they laugh. At Sabaody, when Rayleigh talked about Roger's death, he said that on that day, he had never laughed more, he had never cried more, and he had never drank more sake either, just like on the day that the Roger pirates found the treasure, in order to honor the death of his captain in hope that someone would one day inherit his will. And afterwards, when Luffy lost his crew, all he could think back at, in that moment of sorrow, was them partying together and exchanging sake with each other, as Binks' sake plays in the background of that scene. Then, when Whitebeard declared his final words right before that moment, he thought back at a time when he and Roger exchanged sake together, only to then proclaim that the One Piece does in fact exist. At the end of Dressrosa, when the Grand Fleet was formed, just like Luffy did with Ace and Sabo, several pirates all from different races decided to exchange sake with Luffy. However, Luffy rejected it because he doesn't want to exchange sake to be their boss. He wants to exchange sake to be equals with them, something he did after through the act of a massive party. In Whole Cake Island, Luffy said that he could not become the Pirate King without Sanji. But think about it, is it a coincidence that Luffy always insisted that he wanted a cook and a musician for his crew? Someone who could cook and serve sake at his party at the end of the series, and someone who could play Binks' sake to help connect everybody there together. Then things get big once we reach chapter 967. Of course, we talked about the Roger Pirates literally singing Binks' sake before reaching the final island. And even after that scene, we see it once again. Right after the Roger Pirates left Laugh Tale, they are all drinking sake, and Rayleigh and Roger once again exchange a bottle of sake. Later, in Oden's execution, right as he died, he mentioned that even if some were to forget him, he wouldn't mind because there will be others, specifically scabbards, who will remember him and his dream, and thus he would live on. And after saying that, Oden stated, "If I am meant to be something to accompany one piece of sake, then that suits me fine." Oden is literally describing himself as something that accompanies one piece of sake, because Oden is something that is often eaten alongside sake, so Oden views himself as something that accompanies the sake that is One Piece. And of course, in the end, there's the scene of Yamato and Ace exchanging sake as they talk about Luffy's dream, which leads into the full title of chapter 1000. In the context of that chapter, it's Yamato who is talking in that title, someone who had been waiting so long for Luffy to arrive. But what if in the larger scope of things, the one talking is meant to be Joy Boy, referring exactly to just that. One Piece, the sake I brewed while waiting for you, Straw Hat Luffy. These are but a few examples I can put of how the One Piece has been hidden right under our eyes the whole time, but if you go back, you'll notice so many instances of how important sake is to the series and how it ties with the themes of laughter, partying, and connection. This is of course not even accounting all the countless parties where we've seen everybody indulging in joy and laughter all across the series. Oda has kept the One Piece hidden right under our noses, yet at the same time doing it so subtly that no one ever realized consciously. In the end, at last, we can finally understand why the title of this series is so important, because it literally connects and brings everyone together as one. Everyone becomes One Piece. The words One Piece mean much more than just one thing. On one hand, it refers to the world when it will be unified as the All Blue after the Red Line and the Grand Line are destroyed, literally becoming one piece of a planet. On the other, it also refers to the laugh tale that has been inherited across the ages, the song Binks' Sake, which is quite literally one piece of music. And of course, it refers to the treasure that lies on the final island, being one piece of sake, one that represents a way to unite and connect the entire world together. But in the end, One Piece refers to a much simpler concept. Ourselves, the readers. That we can all come together and become one piece. Through the world, through this laugh tale, and through sake, we can all be connected together and party hand in hand, to throw away war and hatred, and instead indulge in joy and laughter. What point is there to war, to hatred, sorrow, and suffering? Why rob away the freedom from other people when you could simply share your joy together with them? Just like sake, life is meant to be shared with others. It is meant to connect us together. Rather than waste our time in conflict and getting angry with each other, we should just party and laugh together. It's such a simplistic message, a childish one even, but it's such a pure message that fully encapsulates the ideals that Oda has been trying to tell us this entire time. One Piece refers to much more than just a treasure, a laugh tale, or the world itself. It refers to all of us readers. Those of us who, thanks to One Piece, we have come together to become as One Piece ourselves. Because what else is it that connects us together but One Piece? As in the actual manga. In the end, One Piece itself is basically our own One Piece, because it brings us all together. No matter our races, no matter our nationalities, no matter our beliefs, no matter who we are all connected together through this incredible story. Eiichiro Oda has managed to do the impossible and has connected together so many people all across the world, forging friendships, relationships, and connections, bonds of nakama that bring us all together as One Piece. So in that regard, the series could not have a more fitting title, because thanks to it, we all are One Piece. And it is specifically in the manga itself that we finally realize how the answer had been right on our noses this whole entire time. From the very beginning, even before chapter 1, from the second that someone picks up the series, the answer is right in front of their eyes. On the cover of volume 1, we see a large expanse of sea. In it sits a lone island, an island that looks exactly identical to all the depictions we've seen of the All Blue, always drawn with this exact same island, with this precise shape and this exact palm tree. Its presence in this cover symbolizes the All Blue that will be created at the end of the series. But more importantly, on the foreground, we have the Straw Hats partying, singing, and dancing together. And among them, we see Zoro laying on a chest of treasure, which symbolizes the treasure, the One Piece itself. And what does Zoro do? He laughs, while he holds in his hand, at the center of the cover, a bottle of sake, the One Piece.